The pickup truck skidded sideways across the wet asphalt, tires screaming like metal tearing apart. And for one suspended second, the entire stretch of rural highway outside Ashbrook, Kansas seemed to hold its breath before the truck slammed into the guardrail with a violent metallic crack that echoed across the empty farmland, scattering gravel and shards of glass across the rain-dark pavement, while the engine sputtered and died, steam hissing from beneath the crumpled hood as a lone pair of headlights from an approaching sedan cut through the mist and illuminated the wreck like a spotlight on a crime scene. Inside the crushed cab, Sheriff Daniel Mercer gripped the steering wheel with both hands so tightly his knuckles turned white, his breathing ragged and uneven as he stared through the fractured windshield at the long stretch of highway, disappearing into darkness. Blood ran down the side of his temple in a slow, sticky line, dripping onto the collar of his uniform shirt. The rain tapped against the broken glass in uneven rhythms. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then again, then went silent. Daniel blinked slowly, trying to focus. The dashboard lights flickered weakly, painting the interior in dim green shadows. His pulse thundered in his ears. For several seconds, he didn't move. His mind struggled to catch up with the violence of what had just happened. He could still feel the moment the truck lost traction, the back tires sliding, the helpless spin, the impact. But the crash wasn't the thing that made his chest tighten with dread. It was what he had seen in his rearview mirror 2 seconds before the truck started spinning. A pair of headlights. Too close. Too deliberate. Not passing. Following. Daniel forced his fingers to loosen from the steering wheel and slowly pushed open the warped driver's door. The metal groaned in protest as it scraped against the pavement. He stepped out carefully, boots crunching on shattered glass. The night air smelled of wet dirt and burnt rubber. His head throbbed with every heartbeat. He wiped blood from his eyebrow with the back of his hand and turned slowly toward the empty highway behind him. For a moment, there was nothing there except rain drifting through the beams of his truck's dying headlights. Then, far down the road, he saw them again. Headlights. Motionless. Watching. Daniel's stomach tightened. Whoever had been behind him hadn't crashed. They had stopped. Waiting. He reached instinctively toward his hip, feeling the familiar weight of his service pistol beneath his rain-soaked jacket. His fingers brushed the grip, but he didn't draw it yet. Instead, he squinted through the rain, trying to see the shape of the vehicle beyond the lights. A sedan, maybe. Dark. Hard to tell. The engine wasn't running. The headlights stayed on like two cold eyes staring down the road. Daniel's mind moved through possibilities with the trained reflex of someone who had spent 20 years working small-town law enforcement. Drunk driver, random coincidence, or something else. The something else settled into his chest like a stone, because he knew one thing for certain. Nobody drove out here at this hour unless they had a reason. The farmland surrounding Highway 12 stretched for miles in every direction. No houses, no gas stations, no traffic after midnight except long-haul trucks passing through. Tonight there hadn't been a single vehicle on the road until those headlights appeared behind him 10 minutes earlier. He had noticed them first at the four-way intersection outside town. Then again 2 miles later when he turned onto the county highway. The car had stayed back, not overtaking, not falling away, just matching his speed. Watching. Daniel took a slow breath, steadying himself. Rain soaked into the shoulders of his jacket. The cold worked its way through the fabric until he could feel it in his bones. His mind replayed the conversation he had left behind 20 minutes earlier, inside the Ashbrook Sheriff's Office. The fluorescent lights humming overhead. Deputy Carla Ruiz, leaning against the evidence desk with her arms crossed, her expression tight with concern. "You're telling me the accident report doesn't exist?" Daniel had asked quietly. Carla had shaken her head. "It existed yesterday." She tapped a finger against the empty slot in the filing cabinet drawer. "Now, it's gone." Daniel remembered the silence that followed, the unspoken understanding between them. The accident report wasn't just paperwork. It was evidence connected to the death of 16-year-old Tyler Grant, the high school football player who had been found dead on the side of County Road 7 3 nights earlier. Officially, it had been ruled a hit and run, but the evidence didn't sit right with Daniel. The skid marks were wrong. The damage to the boy's body didn't match the vehicle fragments recovered at the scene. And then there was the witness statement from the gas station clerk, who swore he saw a black SUV parked near the road before the crash happened. A black SUV registered to someone who held influence in Ashbrook, someone who could make police reports disappear. Daniel rubbed his jaw slowly, standing beside the wrecked truck as the rain intensified. The headlights down the road remained still, watching him, waiting. He felt the quiet weight of the town pressing against his thoughts. Ashbrook wasn't a big place. 4,000 people. Everyone knew everyone. Families that had lived here for generations. People trusted the sheriff. They trusted Daniel Mercer because he had grown up here, graduated from Ashbrook High, married a local girl, buried his parents in the church cemetery 3 miles west of town. But trust didn't mean the town was clean. It just meant people were better at hiding their secrets. Daniel stepped away from the truck and walked slowly toward the middle of the road, boots splashing through shallow puddles forming along the asphalt. He raised one hand toward the distant headlights. "This is Sheriff Mercer," he called out, across the empty highway, his voice steady despite the pounding in his skull. "If you're back there, step out of the vehicle." The rain swallowed his words. No movement, no response. The headlights stayed fixed on him like unmoving eyes. Daniel's heart rate ticked higher. His instincts were screaming now. Something about this was wrong. Too controlled, too quiet. The kind of silence that comes when someone is deciding whether to act. His hand drifted again toward the pistol on his hip. He wrapped his fingers around the grip, but kept the weapon holstered. "I said, step out of the vehicle." He called again, louder this time. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the headlights blinked off. The sudden darkness swallowed the road. Daniel froze where he stood. The rain continued falling, tapping against the pavement with steady persistence. Somewhere in the darkness, an engine turned over softly. The sound was low and controlled, like someone trying not to draw attention. Daniel's chest tightened. Whoever was in that car wasn't coming to help. The engine revved once. Tires rolled slowly over wet asphalt. The vehicle began moving forward through the darkness toward him. Daniel felt the tension coil through every muscle in his body. He pulled the pistol free from its holster in one smooth motion and raised it toward the approaching shadow. His voice cut through the rain. "Stop the vehicle right there." The car kept moving, slow, deliberate. Daniel could hear the tires slicing through shallow water on the road surface. His finger rested against the trigger. The distance between them closed to maybe 30 yards, 25. The faint outline of the vehicle finally emerged through the rain. A dark sedan, older model, windows tinted. The driver remained hidden behind the glass. Daniel's breathing slowed into a tight, controlled rhythm. "Last warning," he said, voice steady as steel. The sedan rolled to a stop about 15 yards away. For a moment, nothing happened. The rain filled the silence between them. Daniel kept the pistol aimed at the windshield. The seconds stretched uncomfortably long. Then, the driver's side door creaked open. A man stepped out slowly, raising both hands into the air. Daniel recognized him instantly, even through the rain and shadows. His stomach dropped. "Evening, Sheriff," the man said calmly. Daniel lowered the gun a few inches but didn't holster it. His eyes narrowed. Tom Whitaker. Tom Whitaker stood beside the sedan with rain dripping from the brim of his baseball cap. In Ashbrook, everyone knew the Whitaker name. The Whitakers owned half the farmland in the county. Tom's older brother ran the construction company responsible for most of the town's development over the last decade. Money, influence, connections in the state government 2 counties over. Tom himself wasn't officially involved in politics, but people in town knew he had a way of getting things done quietly when problems appeared. Daniel's voice carried a hard edge now. "You mind telling me why you were following me out here tonight?" Tom smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. "Following you?" he said lightly. "Sheriff, I was just driving home." Daniel gestured toward the empty highway stretching for miles behind them. "At midnight, on a road that doesn't lead anywhere near your property." Tom shrugged slowly, rain dripping from his jacket sleeves. "Guess I took a wrong turn." Daniel studied him in silence for a long moment. The man looked relaxed, too relaxed for someone standing 15 yards away from an armed sheriff beside a wrecked patrol truck in the middle of nowhere. Daniel felt a slow knot tightening in his chest. His mind replayed Carla's voice from earlier that night. The accident report doesn't exist anymore, and the name that had quietly surfaced in connection with the missing file, Whitaker Construction. Daniel took a slow step forward. "Tyler Grant," he said quietly. Tom's smile faded just a fraction. Daniel saw it. That tiny shift in the man's expression. A flicker of tension before it vanished again. "What about him?" Tom asked. Daniel's jaw tightened. His accident report disappeared tonight. Rain ran down the side of Daniel's face as he stared across the short stretch of highway separating them. "And somehow you just happened to be out here following me right after I started asking questions about it." Tom let out a soft chuckle. "Sheriff, you sound like you're chasing ghosts." Daniel took another slow step forward, the pistol still held low, but ready. "You know something about that boy's death?" Tom tilted his head slightly, studying Daniel the way someone studies an opponent before making a move. The rain fell harder now, drumming against the hood of the wrecked truck behind them. "Careful, Sheriff," Tom said quietly. "You're starting to make accusations without evidence." Daniel felt the weight of every unsolved question pressing against his thoughts. Tyler Grant, lying broken on the roadside. The missing police report. The black SUV seen near the crash. The Whitaker name surfacing in whispers around town. And now this. A car following him down an empty highway in the middle of the night. His voice hardened. Maybe I don't have the evidence yet. Tom's eyes held his steadily. Yet. Daniel finished the sentence. For a moment, neither man moved. The rain continued, falling between them like a curtain. Then, Tom glanced briefly toward the wrecked patrol truck behind Daniel. Looks like you had a rough night, he said casually. Be a shame if things got worse. Daniel felt a cold chill creep up his spine at the tone in the man's voice. Not a threat. Not exactly. Something quieter. More dangerous. The kind of statement that left room for consequences. Daniel tightened his grip on the pistol. You trying to intimidate a sheriff, Tom? Tom raised his hand slightly again, as if amused by the suggestion. Just offering friendly advice. His eyes shifted briefly toward the darkness beyond the fields. Some roads lead to places folks shouldn't go digging. Daniel stared at him for a long moment, rain dripping from his hair, the taste of blood still lingering at the back of his throat. And in that moment, a realization slowly settled into his mind with quiet certainty. This wasn't about a missing accident report anymore. Whatever had killed Tyler Grant was connected to something much bigger inside Ashbrook. Something powerful enough to erase police evidence. Something powerful enough to follow the sheriff himself into the dark. And if Daniel Mercer kept pushing forward, the road ahead was going to get far more dangerous than a crash on an empty highway. Daniel did not answer right away. He let the silence sit between them, heavy as wet wool, while rain slid down the barrel of his pistol and dripped from his elbow into the black road. His head still rang from the crash, and beneath the ache, there was something sharper, a cold, disciplined anger that had been building over the last 3 days, and now had nowhere left to go. He could feel his pulse in the cut above his eyebrow. He could feel the mud softening under his boots at the edge of the shoulder. He could feel the exact weight of the town pressing down on him, every old favor, every church handshake, every town hall smile, every Friday night football game where men like Tom Whitaker stood on the sidelines acting like Ashbrook belonged to them. Daniel looked at Tom and saw all of it sitting behind the man's quiet expression. Get back in your car, Daniel said. Tom blinked once. What? Get back in your car and drive back to town. Daniel's voice stayed calm, almost flat. Because if you stay out here another 10 seconds, one of us is going to say something he can't take back. Tom studied him, rain darkening the front of his jacket. For the first time all night, the man looked less amused, not afraid, just irritated, as if Daniel had failed to follow a script. You're making this personal, Tom said. Daniel laughed once, without humor. A dead kid makes it personal. Tom's jaw moved slightly. He looked away for half a second toward the fields, toward the darkness beyond the road, then back at Daniel. That small break in eye contact said more than anything else he had done. Daniel saw calculation there, not grief, not shock, not outrage. Calculation. Tom stepped back toward the open driver's door of the sedan, but kept one hand resting on the roof. You want some advice, Daniel? The use of his first name landed differently than the title had. It felt intimate in the ugliest possible way, like a hand settling on a shoulder where it didn't belong. Daniel didn't respond. Tom went on. Go home. Sleep this off. Let Ruiz file the report on your accident. Tell your wife you're all right. Show up at church on Sunday. Shake a few hands. Be smart. Daniel's eyes narrowed. You stay away from my wife. Tom gave the slightest shrug. I didn't say I was going near her. The air changed. Daniel felt it. The conversation was no longer a warning. It was a test. Tom wanted to see where the line was, how far he could lean before Daniel snapped. Daniel lowered the pistol all the way to his side and took 3 slow steps toward him. Not threatening, just close enough now that Tom had to decide whether to hold his ground or retreat. Tom held it. His chin lifted a fraction. The rain hit both men in steady sheets. Listen to me carefully, Daniel said. I don't care how much land your family owns. I don't care who owes your brother money. I don't care what judge plays golf with your uncle. If Tyler Grant was killed, and you buried it, I will pull every thread in this county until the whole thing comes down on top of you. Tom's face remained composed, but Daniel saw a pulse jump once at the side of his neck. You're tired, Tom said softly. And you're bleeding. Daniel leaned in just enough for Tom to hear every word through the rain. And you're nervous. Something flickered in Tom's eyes then. A fast, involuntary flare of anger, and Daniel knew he had landed somewhere real. The engine idled. For a second, Daniel thought he might say something through the open window, something final and cutting, but Tom only stared at him from behind the rain-streaked glass. Then the sedan reversed in a slow arc, its tires hissing over the wet highway, and drove away toward Ashbrook without another word. Daniel stood in the road until the taillights disappeared. Only then did he lower his head and let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The adrenaline began to ebb, leaving behind the dull shaking in his hands that always came after danger passed. He holstered the pistol carefully, wiped rain and blood from his face, and turned back toward the wrecked truck. The front left side had taken most of the damage. Bent axle, crushed fender, headlight gone. He crouched by the rear panel with a wince as pain stabbed through his ribs and ran his fingers along the metal. There, a scrape. Not from the guardrail. Too horizontal. Paint transfer, dark and glossy, almost black in the weak light. Daniel touched it again and looked down at his fingertips. Whoever had come up behind him might not have just been following. They might have nudged him. On a dry road, maybe he would have held it. On rain-slick asphalt, at 50 miles an hour, a tap in the wrong place was enough. He straightened slowly, breathing through the pain in his side, and fished his phone out of his jacket. The screen was spiderwebbed but still lit. 2 bars of signal. Good enough. He dialed Carla. She picked up on the second ring. "Sheriff?" Her voice was thick, with alertness rather than sleep. She had not gone home. Daniel pictured her at the station in the harsh fluorescent light, coffee gone cold on the desk, reading the same lines over and over because her instincts told her not to leave yet. "I'm on Highway 12 near mile marker 19, Daniel said. "Truck's done. Need a tow and a deputy car." He hesitated. "And Carla, log this exactly. Possible vehicle contact before the crash." There was a short silence. "You okay?" "Mostly." "Mostly isn't a medical term, Dan. I'm standing up and talking. That's not the bar." He almost smiled despite himself. "Just send somebody." Her tone changed, tightened. Who was out there? Daniel looked down the road where Tom had vanished. Rain blurred everything past 50 yards. Tom Whitaker. Carla inhaled once, sharp and audible. Did he say anything useful? Useful. No. Interesting. Yes. He heard her already moving, drawer opening, keys in hand. "I'm coming myself." "No. Send Holt with the unit. You stay at the station." "Daniel, stay there," he repeated. "And lock the back evidence room." Another pause. Then, quietly, "You think this is bigger than Tyler?" Daniel pressed his thumb against the cut on his brow and watched fresh blood mix with rain. "I think Tyler touched something by accident. Or saw something. And now the wrong people know I'm looking." Carla's voice dropped even lower. "Maggie home?" "Yeah. You calling her?" Daniel closed his eyes for a second. The image of Maggie flashed across his mind with painful clarity. Warm kitchen light. Her hair tied up loosely. Her reading glasses low on her nose. The old habit she had of waiting up in the living room when he worked late, pretending to watch television but really listening for his truck in the driveway. They had been married 21 years, long enough that love had stopped being theatrical and become structural, built into the beams of everyday life. He felt suddenly sick at the thought of Tom putting her name in his mouth. "I'll call her," Daniel said. "You better." He ended the call and stood for a moment with the phone in his hand, staring at Maggie's name in his contacts. Their relationship had been under strain for months, not because affection was gone, but because grief had changed shape inside their house, and neither of them knew how to live around it. Their son, Eli, had left for Wichita the previous fall, after a fight that started over college money and ended somewhere older and sadder, in all the things fathers and sons never say directly until it is too late. Since then, the house had grown quieter. Maggie filled the silence by volunteering at the church pantry and teaching part-time at the elementary school. Daniel filled it with longer hours and cases that followed him home. Sometimes at night he would wake and find her lying on her side, facing away from him, not asleep, just still. The distance between them was not dramatic. That was the problem. It was ordinary, built from omissions. He hit call. She answered on the first ring. "Dan?" Fear, immediate and unguarded. He swallowed. "I'm okay." "You don't call at this hour to say you're okay unless you're not okay." He looked out over the empty fields. The rain had softened to a steady whisper. "I had a wreck." Her breath caught. "Jesus Christ. I'm on my feet." "Where are you?" "Highway 12. "I'm coming." "No. Don't tell me no." The force in her voice made him close his eyes again. He pictured her already standing, searching for keys. "Maggie, listen to me. Carla's sending a unit. I just need you to stay at the house and lock the doors." That landed. He could hear the shift in her breathing. "Why?" Daniel said nothing for a moment. And in that silence, she understood more than he wanted her to. "Dan," she said, quieter now. "Why do I need to lock the doors?" He pressed his hand against the back of his neck. Rainwater ran down under his collar. Tom Whitaker was here. Another silence. He could practically feel her mind catching up, assembling the pieces, moving from accident to threat, without wanting to name either one. When she spoke again, her voice was low and steady, the voice she used when fear had become too solid to ignore. "Did he do this?" "I don't know yet." "That's not what I asked." Daniel looked at the black scrape on the truck again. I don't know what I can prove. She let that sit. Then, almost in a whisper, he knows where we live. Daniel felt something twist deep inside him, something raw and immediate and older than duty. I'm sending Deputy Holt by the house after he gets me. No, he frowned. What? No uniform sitting out front. Not tonight. Not unless you want the whole town talking by breakfast. Even now she was thinking clearly. Ashbrook fed on spectacle. A deputy car parked outside the sheriff's home at 1 in the morning would spread across town faster than any official statement. Daniel hated that she was right. Then turn on the porch lights and the mudroom light, he said. Keep your phone on. Don't answer the door for anybody. Anybody. Dan. What? She took a breath. Come home alive. The words hit him harder than the crash had. For a second he couldn't speak. He remembered the first apartment they had rented over a hardware store in Salina when he was still in the academy. The summer heat, the cheap blinds rattling at night, Maggie barefoot in one of his old t-shirts, laughing because the sink leaked every time they ran hot water. Back then the future had felt open, almost generous. Neither of them had understood how many small injuries a marriage could absorb while still standing, or how quickly fear could strip life down to one simple plea. I will, he said, and hoped he wasn't lying. Deputy Holt arrived 12 minutes later in a county cruiser, face pale when he saw the condition of the truck. He was 26, square-shouldered, earnest, and still young enough to believe procedure could save you if you followed it closely enough. He got out into the rain and hurried over. Sheriff, you need an ambulance? No. Holt looked at the blood on Daniel's face and clearly disagreed, but knew better than to argue first. Tau's 10 minutes out. He glanced down the road. Anyone else involved? Daniel looked at him. Officially, not yet. Holt nodded too quickly, the kind of nod a younger deputy gave when he wasn't sure what layer of truth he was being trusted with. Daniel walked him through the scene anyway. The skid, the road conditions, the possible contact on the rear quarter panel. Holt crouched beside the truck with a flashlight, the beam cutting a white line across the black paint transfer. That wasn't from the rail, he muttered. No. You want photos before the tow, every angle. Holt moved methodically, rain dripping off the brim of his hat, while he documented the scrape, the tire marks, the gouges in the shoulder. Daniel stood a few yards away and watched his deputy work, his thoughts drifting unwillingly back to Tyler Grant. Tyler had been 17 in 3 weeks, not 16. Daniel corrected himself suddenly, annoyed by the error. The town still talked about him like he were younger, because death had a way of freezing people in simpler versions of themselves. Tyler had been broad-shouldered, quick to smile, good enough at linebacker that the coach thought he might get a junior college offer. He worked afternoons at Bender's grocery bagging produce and carrying boxes to customers' cars. Daniel had known the boy since he was 8. Knew his mother too, Denise, who cleaned rooms at the motel on Route 6 and still came to church every Sunday with lipstick on and tiredness hidden under powder. Denise had sat across from Daniel the morning after Tyler died, with both hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee she never drank. She had not cried at first. That had been the worst part. She kept asking practical questions in a voice that sounded emptied out. Had they found the driver? Was Tyler alone? Did he suffer? Daniel had answered as honestly as he could. No. They didn't know. Probably not long. Then, after a silence, Denise asked, Was my boy scared? Daniel had not known how to answer that. He still didn't. Holt finished the photos and walked back. Tau's close. He hesitated. Sheriff, can I ask something? Daniel nodded. This Tyler Grant thing. Holt shifted his weight. Are we looking at an accident or not? Daniel studied the young man. Rainwater ran down Holt's cheeks from under his cap, making him look even younger. Honest, nervous, careful. Daniel had spent enough years in command to know there were moments when the wrong answer could either recruit someone into a fight they weren't ready for or teach them never to trust you again. We're looking at a dead kid with a missing file, Daniel said. That's enough to keep your eyes open. Holt nodded once, more firmly this time. Yes, sir. The tow truck arrived with flashing amber lights that painted the wet highway in rotating gold. The driver, Roy Givens, climbed out, pulling his collar up against the rain. Roy had lived in Ashbrook his whole life and knew how to see things without appearing to. He took one look at Daniel's truck, one look at Daniel's face, and wisely kept his questions limited to the mechanical. While Roy hooked chains under the axle and muttered to himself about bent suspension, Daniel climbed into the passenger side of Holt's cruiser. The heater was blasting. The warmth hit his wet clothes and raised a sudden wave of exhaustion so intense he had to brace an elbow against the door. Holt started the car and pulled onto the road back toward town. For several miles, neither of them spoke. Wipers swept rhythmically across the windshield, Fields unrolled in darkness on both sides, broken only by fence lines and the occasional mailbox. Daniel watched the road and tried to think clearly. Physical pain had begun to sort itself into locations: temple, ribs, left shoulder, knee. Manageable. The deeper problem was strategic. If Tom Whitaker had followed him openly, that meant one of two things. Either Tom wanted to scare him off, which was crude but plausible, or Tom wanted Daniel to know he was being watched, which meant the real players behind this were comfortable enough to stop hiding. Neither option was good. As the cruiser passed the old feed mill outside town, Daniel said, "Don't mention Whitaker over radio. Not tonight." Holt glanced at him. "Understood. And when you write your incident supplement, keep it tight. Road conditions, crash damage, possible secondary vehicle involvement, pending forensic inspection. Nothing speculative." Holt nodded again. "Yes, sir." Daniel looked out at the rain-fogged darkness. "You trust the dispatch room?" Holt hesitated. "Marla's on till 6. Marla Jensen, 52. Reliable. Talked too much at potlucks but never in uniform matters." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Fine." The cruiser rolled into Ashbrook just after 1:30. Main Street was nearly empty. Storefronts dark except for the all-night gas station at the corner and the pharmacy sign still glowing red above a locked door. Rain had driven everyone indoors. The town looked harmless in weather like this, almost tender. Brick facades. American flags hanging limp above awnings. The courthouse clock lit white against the dark. Daniel had loved this sight once, loved the sense that small places still held the country together. Tonight, it looked different. Too quiet, too many windows he could not see through. Holt turned toward the sheriff's office, a low brick building attached to the county annex. Carla was waiting under the overhang in jeans, boots, and a sheriff's department windbreaker thrown over a gray t-shirt. Her dark hair was tied back hastily, and she had that look on her face Daniel had seen before only on bad nights, when her intelligence became a form of anger. She opened the passenger door before Holt had fully stopped. "You look terrible," she said. "Good evening to you too." She leaned in, examining the cut on his head without touching it. "You need stitches. I'll live." "That's not an answer." Daniel got out slowly. His ribs complained. Carla noticed immediately. "Hospital." "No." She stared at him, then glanced at Holt. Was he always this stubborn, or is it weather-related? Holt, trapped, managed a weak smile. Daniel said, "Inside." They went through the side door into the fluorescent chill of the office. The familiar smell of old coffee, copier toner, wet jackets, and institutional cleaner settled around him. The building had never been pleasant, but tonight the normalcy of it felt strangely fragile. Carla handed him a towel from the supply closet. He wiped rain from his face and neck while she closed the evidence room door and checked the lock again even though it was already locked. "I pulled backup copies from the accident intake server," she said. "Nothing. Tyler's file number now links to a blank shell. Whoever removed the report knew enough to scrub the digital trail too." Daniel dropped the towel onto a chair. "Any access logs? Disabled between 9:16 and 9:34. Convenient." Carla crossed her arms. "Not convenient. Intentional." Daniel leaned a hand on the desk, feeling the ache in his ribs deepen. "We need to know who had access. Officially, you, me, Marla, and Chief Deputy Orson." Daniel looked up sharply. Carla met his eyes. The room seemed to tighten around his name. Chief Deputy Leonard Orson had been with the department 18 years, older than Daniel by 10. Methodical, polite, well-liked, and close enough to retirement that most people assumed he'd coast there quietly. He had also played cards twice a month at the American Legion with Tom Whitaker's brother, Neil. Daniel had never treated that as meaningful. Small towns ran on overlapping circles, but tonight every overlap felt different. "Orson was off by 8, Carla said. "Supposedly." Daniel closed his eyes for half a second. He pictured Leonard's careful handwriting, the starch in his uniforms, the way he always spoke about order as if it were a moral virtue rather than an operational goal. Betrayal did not hit hardest when it came from enemies. It hit hardest when it emerged from men whose habits you had mistaken for character. He opened his eyes. "Call him?" Carla asked. Daniel shook his head. "No. Not yet." "Why not?" "Because if he's dirty, I want him sleeping easy a few more hours." Carla looked at him, then nodded once. That was why he trusted her. She could challenge him without needing the last word. "I bagged the evidence room key log," she said, "and I printed camera stills from the back hall." She slid a folder across the desk. Daniel opened it. Grainy black and white images, timestamps. At 9:12 p.m. The hallway was empty. At 9:18 p.m. a figure entered from the west side door wearing a rain poncho and ball cap, head down, face mostly obscured. At 9:21 p.m. The same figure exited, carrying nothing visible. Height medium, build average, gender difficult to tell. Daniel studied the stills until his eyes hurt. The posture snagged at something in his memory, but would not resolve. Could be anybody, Carla said bitterly. That's the point. Daniel set the folder down. The station's fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere down the hall, a printer kicked on and then stopped. Rain ticked faintly against the narrow windows. He became aware suddenly of how tired he was, how long the night had already become, and how many layers of this thing he had not yet touched. Tyler dead on the roadside. File erased. Chief Deputy possibly compromised. Whitaker bold enough to taunt him after a staged crash. He pressed both palms against the desk and lowered his head, not from weakness but to force his thoughts into order. Carla watched him silently. After a moment, she said, more gently, Dan. He looked up. What? You need to decide whether this stays in-house. Daniel knew what she meant. If he called the State Bureau now, the case would widen instantly. External oversight, outside investigators, political fallout, loss of local control. But if the department itself had been penetrated, keeping it in-house might be the stupidest move he could make. The decision sat in front of him like a live wire. He thought of Denise Grant sitting across from him with that untouched coffee. He thought of Maggie in the house with the lights on. He thought of Tom Whitaker saying some roads lead to places folks shouldn't go digging. He felt, beneath the pain and exhaustion and anger, the first clear edge of a larger truth. This story had been running under Ashbrook long before Tyler died. Tyler's death had only split the surface open enough for the rot underneath to show. Daniel straightened slowly. Not yet, he said. Carla's eyes sharpened. You sure? No. He took a breath. But before I hand this to the state, I want to know what exactly I'm handing over, and who inside this building I can still trust. Carla nodded once. No argument, just acceptance of the road in front of them. Daniel picked up the photo folder again and looked at the faceless figure in the poncho. Somewhere outside, on the empty wet streets of Ashbrook, people were sleeping through the storm, while other people lay awake, making phone calls, erasing records, deciding what to do about a sheriff who had not taken the hint. He could feel the next hours gathering around him like weather. He sent Holt home at 2:15, with instructions to sleep in uniform and keep his radio close, then locked the front office door himself and followed Carla into the back records room, where the old file cabinets sat beside newer metal shelving, and the hum of the climate control unit made the small space feel colder than the rest of the building. The room smelled faintly of paper dust, toner, and the lemon oil Carla used when she was too anxious to sit still. She had already spread 3 boxes across the center table, all of them tied to Tyler Grant in ways that had seemed routine 48 hours earlier and sinister now. Daniel lowered himself carefully into a chair, every muscle in his torso objecting, and looked over the material under the flat white light. Crime scene photos, initial witness notes, the coroner's preliminary sheet, vehicle debris analysis, incomplete. Tyler's phone extraction request, still pending. The boy's backpack inventory. Daniel put both forearms on the table and forced himself to slow down. Pain made people impatient. Impatience made them stupid. Carla slid a mug of black coffee beside him. It was too strong and already cooling, but he drank it anyway. Start with the timelines, she said. Daniel nodded. They built them by hand on a yellow legal pad, because somehow ink on paper still felt more honest than a screen. Tyler left football practice at 6:12 p.m., according to Coach Murdoch. He stopped at Bender's Grocery at 6:31 and clocked in for a short evening shift unloading produce. He clocked out at 8:04. At 8:17, his phone pinged a tower near the gas station on Route 6. At 8:24, the station clerk, Melvin Price, saw Tyler outside talking to someone in a dark vehicle. Melvin had first said SUV, then later said maybe truck, then corrected again to SUV, which could have been the ordinary erosion of memory or pressure applied after the fact. At 8:41, a 911 call came in from a passing driver, reporting a body on County Road 7 just south of the old quarry entrance. Daniel stared at the numbers until they stopped feeling abstract and turned back into the shape of a living boy's final hour. He wasn't headed home, Carla said quietly. Daniel looked up. What? She pointed with her pen. From Bender's to his house is east, the gas station is west, County Road 7 is south. He was moving around on purpose. Daniel leaned back slightly, then regretted it when his ribs lit up. Meeting someone, or following something. Daniel rubbed his mouth with one hand. The station around them had gone fully silent now. Marla must have turned down the dispatch volume in the front room. Rain no longer struck the windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind the hollow stillness that always settled over small towns in the hours before dawn. It was the silence Daniel had known his whole life, the kind that made every sound inside a building feel intrusive. He looked again at the timeline. Let's forget the road for a second, he said. What would pull Tyler out that way? Carla flipped open the backpack inventory. He had gym clothes, cleats, a protein bar, a geometry folder, and $12 cash. She turned another page. No drugs, no alcohol, no notes. Daniel tapped the table once. Phone. Still waiting on the extraction. Call the regional tech at 6. Wake him up if you have to. She gave him a look. Gladly. Daniel almost smiled. Then his eyes dropped to the coroner sheet. Cause of death. Listed provisionally. Blunt force trauma consistent with vehicle impact. But even reading the wording again irritated him. It was the sort of phrasing that could become a wall if enough people wanted it to. Consistent with did not mean caused by, and it did not explain the abrasions on Tyler's forearms or the dirt under his fingernails, or the fact that his right sneaker had been found 15 feet away, while the left remained tied on. Those details had bothered Daniel from the beginning, because they suggested movement before impact, some kind of struggle or flight. We need to talk to Denise again, he said. Carla nodded. Morning? After school drop-off. Give her a little time to breathe. He paused. I'll do it. Carla studied him. You sure? No. He looked at the papers, but she deserves somebody who won't dance around it. Carla sat across from him and folded her arms. In the cold white light, her face looked more tired than angry now. She had been with the department 9 years, came in from Wichita after an ugly divorce and a dead-end patrol assignment, and stayed because Ashbrook gave her something big cities didn't, the illusion that outcomes still depended on choices rather than systems. Daniel had hired her because she asked difficult questions without trying to sound clever. Over the years that had turned into a rough kind of loyalty neither of them talked about. She watched him for a long moment, and then said, You thinking about Maggie? Daniel let out a slow breath through his nose. Yeah. She safe? For tonight, maybe. Carla nodded once, understanding the maybe. Daniel drank more coffee, though it had turned bitter and thin at the bottom of the mug. He felt the exhaustion settling deeper now. Not like sleepiness, but like weight. When you stayed up through a crisis long enough, the body stopped asking for rest and simply began charging interest. He looked at the hallway camera, still again, the faceless person in the poncho. Show me the west side door log. Carla handed over another page. Mechanical key access. No electronic badge. That door could still be opened the old-fashioned way, which in one sense was good because it meant any number of people with copied keys might have used it, and in another sense, was terrible for the same reason. Daniel traced the list with one finger. Maintenance. Marla. Orson. 2 custodial staff. Himself. Carla. The county clerk had temporary access during the last plumbing repair. Too many names. Too much slippage. I want the locks changed by noon, he said. Already called it in, Carla replied. Good. He sat in silence another moment. Then something nudged at him from the edge of memory. He picked up the hallway still and angled it toward the light. The build was average, the poncho generic, the face hidden, but there was something in the way the figure carried the shoulders, slightly uneven, right side lower. Can you zoom this? Carla stood, took the photo, and moved to the computer in the corner. She pulled up the archived feed, frame by frame. The pixels broke apart when enlarged, but the posture remained. Daniel stood behind her, one hand on the back of the chair, leaning in despite the pull in his ribs. The figure paused near the evidence room, head turning briefly toward camera. Just a shape, a smear of pale cheek beneath the cap brim, then gone again. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Freeze it there, Carla did. The figure's right shoulder dipped. The left arm swung freer than the right. Not dramatic, just enough. Daniel said, You remember Orson's shoulder surgery? Carla glanced up at him. 3 years ago, rotator cuff, right side. Daniel stared at the screen. It could mean nothing. Half the county had old injuries. Men in farming towns carried damage the way city people carried stress, invisibly, until you knew where to look. But once the possibility landed, it did not let go. Carla said what he was thinking. Could still be a fake limp. Yeah. Could still be anybody. Yeah. The silence stretched. Then Carla swiveled toward him fully. So what do you want to do? Daniel looked at the clock. 2:38. Nothing loud. He thought for a moment. We don't call Orson in. We don't tip him. At 6:30, I want you at his house. Her eyebrows rose. Search warrant? Conversation. And if he doesn't feel like talking. Daniel held her eyes. Then we see how nervous he gets. Carla leaned back and exhaled. That's thin. It's all we've got before daylight. She considered that and nodded. Fine. Daniel pushed away from the desk. I'm going home for 2 hours. Carla looked skeptical. You going to sleep? Probably not. Hospital first. No. She stood too. frustration flashing across her face again. You got hit hard enough to spin a truck, Dan. You could have a concussion and 2 cracked ribs. Then I'll enjoy finding out at my own kitchen table. She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. Her expression softened in that brief, guarded way it sometimes did when she let concern show before she could hide it again. Take your sidearm off before you fall asleep, she said. That's my medical advice. Daniel gave her a tired look. Noted. The drive home through the sleeping town felt unreal. Main Street lay empty under weak amber lamps. The church steeple stood pale against a clearing sky. Water ran in thin silver ribbons along the curbs. Daniel drove Holt's borrowed cruiser because his own truck was headed to impound, and every block of the route reminded him how exposed he was. The white farmhouse at the edge of town with the rusted swing set, the darkened diner, the hardware store, Mr. Linden's barber shop. Places that had once read as familiar now seemed to contain hidden witnesses. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the eastern sky was beginning to lose its blackness. The porch light burned, the mudroom light too, just as he had told Maggie. He sat behind the wheel for a moment, engine idling, looking at the house. They had bought it when Eli was 4, white siding, green shutters Maggie chose, a maple tree out front that now spread wide enough to shade half the yard in summer. Daniel had painted the nursery himself back when he still believed good intentions naturally turned into good outcomes. He turned off the engine and climbed out. The wet grass smelled sharp and clean. His boots sounded too loud on the porch boards. Maggie opened the door before he reached for the knob. She took one look at him and all the color left her face. She was wearing gray sweatpants and one of his old department hoodies. Hair down now, eyes red not from crying exactly but from not blinking enough. Jesus. She stepped aside and he came in. The house was warm, quiet, faintly scented with coffee and the lavender detergent she insisted on using for towels. It hit him with sudden force how badly he wanted the ordinary, wanted to walk in from a late shift to mundane complaints about bills and school board gossip, and whether the faucet in the hall bathroom was leaking again. Instead, Maggie shut the door, locked it, and turned to him with both hands pressed flat against the wood, as if steadying herself. Let me look at you. He started to say he was fine, then saw her expression and didn't. She moved close, fingertips gentle as she examined the cut above his brow, the swelling near his temple, the stiffness in how he held his side. Her touch was practiced. She had spent years teaching first graders how to clean scraped knees and broken pride, and another 2 decades learning her husband's version of pain. The way he minimized it, the way he carried it in his shoulders first and his eyes second. You need an ER, she said. You sound like Carla. Good. Then maybe you'll listen. Daniel gave a tired breath that almost became a laugh. Not tonight. It is morning, Dan. He looked past her at the kitchen clock. 3:06. Fine. This morning. She led him to the kitchen table without arguing further, which somehow unsettled him more than a fight would have. The kitchen light was soft over the oak table. A mug sat untouched near her elbow. She must have made coffee and then forgotten it existed. He lowered himself into the chair carefully. Maggie brought a clean towel, a bowl of warm water, antiseptic, and the old metal first aid tin they had carried through 3 houses and 1 child. She stood between his knees, dabbing at the blood on his forehead. He winced. Hold still. I am holding still. You are flinching in place. He looked up at her, even exhausted, even scared. She was beautiful in the plain, deep way that comes from years rather than angles. The lines near her eyes were a map of everything laughter and disappointment had done to them. He realized suddenly that he had not really looked at her in weeks, not with his full attention, not as someone separate from the ongoing logistics of marriage. Shame moved quietly through him. She noticed him watching. What? Nothing. That usually means something. Daniel let his gaze drop to the table. I'm sorry. Maggie stopped blotting his forehead. For what part? There it was. Not cruel, not dramatic, just accurate. She set the towel down and moved to sit across from him. I need the truth, Daniel. He nodded slowly. Tom Whitaker was on the road after the crash. After, or before. Both, probably. She absorbed that. Her face did not change much, but he saw the effort it took. Do you think he meant to kill you? Daniel stared at the wood grain of the table. In patrol work, questions were often easier when they came from strangers, because strangers didn't know which answers could destroy their sleep. I think he wanted me afraid. That's not what I asked. He looked up. I don't know. Maggie pressed her lips together and sat very still. He knew that stillness. It meant she was organizing fear into tasks because tasks could be survived. I'll call the school and take the day, she said. You're not going to school. I teach reading groups, not hostage negotiation. That's not funny. I know. She rubbed a hand across her forehead. Should I call Eli? Daniel hesitated. The room seemed to narrow around the question. Eli, 20 years old, living in Wichita with 2 roommates, and a stubborn sense that distance could solve whatever fathers and sons damaged in each other. Their last real conversation had been Thanksgiving. Since then, there had been 2 careful phone calls and 1 text on Christmas. Daniel had told himself the boy needed space. That space had now congealed into absence. Not yet, he said. Maggie's eyes hardened slightly. Because you don't want him worried, or because you don't want him hearing your voice like this? Daniel felt the sting because it was deserved. Both. She leaned back. The kitchen was so quiet he could hear the refrigerator motor humming, and farther away, the tick of rainwater dropping from the porch gutter. You need to stop acting like protecting people and shutting them out are the same thing, she said. He opened his mouth, then closed it. A younger version of himself would have pushed back, would have called the comment unfair, would have defended the logic of command and compartmentalization, but age had not made him wiser so much as more tired of lying in familiar directions. You're right, he said. Maggie looked startled, then sadder. I know I'm right. The words hung there. He thought of Eli at 17, jaw tight, standing in this same kitchen after Daniel refused to co-sign a transfer to an expensive college program they could not really afford. The argument had not been about money in the end. It had become about whether Daniel respected ambition he did not understand, whether Eli heard caution as rejection, whether fathers mistake control for care. Maggie had tried to intervene, and only ended up standing between 2 men who both felt unseen. Since then, every conversation with their son carried the bruise of that night. Daniel had told himself there would be time to repair it. There was always time, until there wasn't. Maggie rose and refilled his mug, even though he had not asked. I'm calling him at breakfast, she said. You can talk to him or not, but I'm not keeping this from him. Daniel nodded. Okay. She handed him the coffee. Their fingers brushed. Neither of them pulled away immediately. The contact lasted maybe 1 second. It felt longer. There's more, she said. He knew there was. He could hear it in her voice. What? Maggie looked toward the dark hallway, as if checking that the house itself wasn't listening. Yesterday afternoon, before any of this, I had a parent conference after school. When I came out to the parking lot, there was a note under my wiper. Daniel set the mug down too hard. What note? I threw it away. Maggie. It said, tell your husband to remember which families built this town. Daniel went perfectly still. A cold precision replaced the exhaustion in him. Why didn't you tell me? Her eyes flashed. Because for 1 hour I wanted to believe it was some drunk idiot trying to scare the sheriff's wife. Because I was tired. Because I knew exactly what would happen to your face if I showed you. Daniel stood too quickly, pain burning through his side, and had to brace himself against the table. Maggie rose as well. Sit down. What trash? Kitchen. He went to the cabinet under the sink, pulled out the bin, and rummaged through coffee grounds, paper towels, vegetable peelings sealed in a grocery sack. Maggie moved beside him and pointed. There. He unfolded the damp, crumpled paper on the counter. Cheap-lined notepad torn unevenly at the top. Block letters in thick black marker, no signature, no print to speak of through the smearing moisture. But the message was clear enough. Tell your husband to remember which families built this town. Daniel stared at it while Maggie watched him. The note was not just a threat. It was ideology. Possession disguised as heritage. The oldest poison in places like Ashbrook. Men who inherited money mistaking that inheritance for authorship, then calling everyone else disloyal for refusing to stay in their assigned place. He folded the paper carefully and slid it into a sandwich bag from the drawer. I'm taking this in. Maggie crossed her arms over the hoodie. And then what? Daniel looked at her. The truth rose before he could polish it. Then I stopped pretending this is still a normal investigation. The sky outside the window had turned a thin, early gray. In an hour the town would wake. School buses, delivery trucks, farmers heading out, coffee poured at counters all over Main Street, while people talked about weather and budgets and a sheriff's wreck on Highway 12. Underneath all of it, the other machinery would start too, the hidden one. Phone calls, quiet warnings, stories adjusted in advance. Daniel felt the day approaching like an enemy force. Maggie saw it on his face. You're going back now. It wasn't a question. Yeah. She nodded once, resigned but not defeated. Then hear me clearly. He waited. If this reaches our son through gossip before it reaches him through family, I will never forgive you. Daniel, let that land fully. It won't. And if someone comes to this house again. Her voice did not break. That was what made it hard to hear. I need to know whether you are protecting us or using us as the reason you keep going. He stared at her. There were moments in marriage when one sentence illuminated 10 years. This was one of them. She was asking whether duty had become his favorite alibi, whether being needed by the town had allowed him to avoid the more intimate terrors of being needed by his own family. Daniel felt something in him give way. Not dramatically, just enough for honesty to enter. Both, he said quietly. Maggie closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them again, they were wet, but steady. At least that's the truth. He stepped closer. Not all the way. Just closer enough that the space between them felt chosen rather than accidental. I don't know how to do this without bringing it home, he said. I never did. Maggie's expression softened, tired and painful, and still somehow tender beneath it. Then stop acting like you have to do it alone. He nodded once. There was nothing else to say that wasn't smaller than the moment. He kissed her forehead, a brief contact that smelled like shampoo and sleeplessness, then picked up the bagged note and his keys. As he reached the door, Maggie said, Dan. He turned. Call Eli yourself before 7. I will. Not as sheriff. She held his eyes. As his father. Daniel left before he could answer badly. Outside, the air had cooled after the rain, and the town was beginning to show signs of waking. A porch light flicked off across the street. Somewhere a dog barked twice. The borrowed cruiser started on the first turn. As he pulled away, he saw Maggie still standing behind the curtain in the front window, one hand holding the fabric aside, watching until he turned the corner. The station looked different in morning gray, less dramatic and more vulnerable, like any county building with budget cuts hidden in its walls. Carla was in the parking lot with 2 paper cups and a file tucked under one arm. She got into the passenger side before he fully parked. You look worse, she said. Marital medicine. She handed him a coffee. I ran Orson's activity from the last month. Daniel took the cup, and Carla opened the file. He made 3 evidence room entries after hours, tied to cases that didn't require after-hours access. 2 were logged as inventory checks. 1 had no explanation. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. Dates. 1 2 weeks ago, 1 6 days ago, 1 last night. Daniel looked at her. He logged the last night, at 9:26, which mean either he wanted us to see it, or he assumed nobody would look that closely. Daniel stared through the windshield at the station doors. Dawn had fully arrived now, colorless and unforgiving. The day was no longer gathering. It was here. Let's go talk to Leonard Orson, he said. Orson lived alone in a narrow brick ranch house on Walnut Street, 3 blocks from the old Methodist church, and close enough to downtown that he could hear the courthouse bell if his windows were open on the hour. By the time Daniel and Carla pulled into the driveway, the sun had climbed just high enough to turn the wet lawns silver, and the town had begun its weekday motions, quiet but visible now in passing pickups, a jogger with headphones, a woman in scrubs backing out of a driveway with one hand on a travel mug. The ordinary life of Ashbrook moved around them with indifferent rhythm, and Daniel found that more unsettling than an empty street would have been. Evil hidden inside silence felt almost cinematic. Evil hidden inside routine was what actually ruined places. Orson's house looked tidy in the way of a man who had reduced his life to habits, after whatever fullness once existed in it had gone elsewhere. The hedges were trimmed. The flag bracket by the front door stood empty. A ceramic planter near the steps held dead mums from last fall that no one had bothered to replace. Daniel shut off the cruiser and sat for 1 second with both hands on the wheel, feeling the bruise in his ribs pulse with every breath. He had not called Eli yet. The fact sat in his chest like a small stone of shame. Maggie's words had followed him all the way here, not as sheriff, as his father. He told himself he would do it after this conversation, when he had something coherent to say, and he knew, even as he thought it, that coherence was the excuse men like him always reached for, when what they really feared was vulnerability without structure. Carla opened her door first. You ready? She asked. Daniel got out. No. She gave him a brief look that was almost sympathetic. Good, means you're awake. They walked up the damp concrete path together. Daniel noticed the curtains in the front room were open just an inch at the seam. Somebody was awake. Somebody had seen them arrive. He knocked 3 times, hard enough to remove ambiguity, but not enough to sound theatrical. They waited. Inside, floorboards creaked. A shadow crossed the frosted glass beside the door. Then the lock turned. Leonard Orson opened the door wearing khaki pants, white undershirt, and reading glasses low on his nose. His gray hair was combed back, though one side had flattened in sleep. He looked from Daniel to Carla and then to the cruiser in the driveway. His face arranged itself into mild confusion with admirable speed. Sheriff, he said. Deputy Ruiz, bit early for house calls. Daniel watched him carefully. No immediate fear, no visible panic. but there was a tightness around the mouth that hadn't been there yesterday afternoon. "Need a word, Leonard?" Orson opened the door wider without argument. "Come in." The living room smelled faintly of aftershave, coffee, and the dust-dry odor of books that rarely moved from their shelves. Framed service citations hung on one wall beside a photograph of Orson in uniform, 30 pounds lighter and 15 years younger, standing between two state troopers at what looked like a highway interdiction seminar. Another frame held a family portrait at least a decade old. Leonard, a woman Daniel remembered only dimly from one Rotary luncheon years back, and a teenage girl in a choir dress. The wife had left, if Daniel remembered correctly. The daughter lived in Tulsa. Orson had never spoken much about either fact. The television was off. A local weather report sat muted on the screen. Everything in the room suggested a man who valued order because order was the only language left to him after intimacy failed. Daniel knew that type well because he shared too much of it. "Coffee?" Orson asked. "No," Daniel said. Carla remained standing by the door, not hostile, just positioned. Orson noticed, and Daniel saw him register the geometry of the room. Witness. Exit coverage. This was not a friendly check-in. Leonard gestured toward the dining table. "Then sit down and tell me what this is about." Daniel sat because he wanted the conversation to begin on Leonard's ground, if only to see how confidently the man occupied it. Carla stayed standing. Orson sat across from Daniel and folded his hands. His right shoulder did indeed sit slightly lower than the left. Old surgery. Permanent adjustment. Daniel kept his gaze on Leonard's face, not the shoulder. "There was a vehicle incident last night," Daniel said. "I heard," Orson replied. "Marla called around 6, said you were all right." The answer came too ready. Marla doesn't usually make welfare calls for minor traffic wrecks. Orson's expression barely shifted. "This town talks." Daniel let a beat pass. Tyler Grant's file disappeared. This time Leonard's eyes did change, just not in the way Daniel expected. Not guilt first. Resignation. A very old, very tired kind. It flashed and was gone, but Daniel caught it. "That's so," Orson said. "You logged into the evidence room at 9:26 last night." Orson looked at Carla, then back to Daniel. "If this is about procedure, I can explain the entry." "Then explain it." Leonard adjusted his glasses with 2 fingers, buying half a second. "I came in to check inventory from the Grant case after Ruiz mentioned discrepancies yesterday. I found the file already gone." Carla spoke for the first time. "You didn't tell anyone?" Leonard turned toward her. "Because by then the server access was already compromised, the paper file was gone, and I wanted to be certain before I accused one of my own people." Carla's jaw tightened. "So, you decided silence was better. I decided caution was better." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "You checked the hall camera?" "No." Daniel, let that sit because it was a lie. He didn't know for certain it was a lie, but the man's delivery shifted on the word no. Too clipped. Too clean. Orson could hear it too. That was the thing about seasoned people under pressure. They recognized their own mistakes almost at the same time you did. He inhaled slowly and looked down at the table for a moment before meeting Daniel's eyes again. "You're not here just to ask about a missing file," he said. "No." "Then ask the real question." Daniel felt the room tighten. "Were you in the building in a poncho last night?" Leonard didn't answer immediately. Outside, a car rolled past on the street, tires whispering over damp asphalt. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a garage door motor started up. The town kept moving. Inside the house, silence broadened until even the muted weather radar on the television looked accusatory. Finally, Orson said, "Yes." Carla's breath sharpened. Daniel did not move. "Why?" Leonard removed his glasses and set them on the table with careful precision. Without them, his face looked older, the lines around his eyes no longer buffered by reflective lenses. "Because I saw Neil Whitaker coming out of the annex lot at 9:10 and it set off alarms." Daniel's heart rate kicked once. Neil Whitaker, older brother, public face, suits at county fundraisers, contracts, civility as camouflage. "Keep going," Daniel said. Leonard rubbed a thumb across the bridge of his nose. "I doubled back to the station after I'd already left, parked in the alley, threw on the poncho because it was pouring and because I didn't want to be recognized from the street. I went in through the west side door to check the Grant file." Carla's voice came hard now. "Why not call the sheriff?" Leonard looked at her, then at Daniel. "Because I wasn't sure how far this had reached." The sentence landed with a dull force. Daniel felt anger flash through him, but beneath it something more complicated. He knew exactly why Leonard thought it could have reached farther than one file. When institutions start rotting, everyone becomes suspicious in concentric circles. No one is exempt, not even the man in charge. "You thought maybe me too," Daniel said. Leonard did not flinch. "I thought it would have been negligent not to consider it." Carla let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. That is unbelievable. No, Orson said, tired rather than defensive. It's honest. Daniel held up one hand toward Carla without looking at her. She fell silent, barely. You got inside, Daniel said. And Leonard stared at the table. The file was gone. Anything else? Another pause. Daniel watched him and saw the internal calculus happening. What to withhold, what to surrender, what price had already become unavoidable. When Leonard finally spoke, his voice had changed, lower, less procedural. There was an envelope in the empty slot. Daniel felt every muscle in his back tighten. What envelope? Brown interoffice. No label. Where is it? Leonard looked up. I took it. Carla took a step forward. You what? Daniel stayed still, though his hands had begun to throb. Go get it. Leonard did not move right away. You should know what's in it before I hand it over. Daniel's voice cooled. That wasn't a suggestion. Leonard stood, slower than his usual clipped efficiency, and disappeared down the hallway. Daniel heard a closet door open, then another, then the scrape of a box being shifted. Carla leaned in close and whispered, You think this is a setup? Maybe. You trust him. Daniel kept his eyes on the hallway. No. Then why are we sitting? He answered just as quietly. Because if he wanted to run, he'd have done it before opening the door. Leonard returned carrying a sealed manila envelope folded once at the flap. He placed it on the table between them, but kept two fingers resting on top of it for a moment, as though feeling its weight one last time. I didn't open it, he said. Daniel looked at him. Why not? Leonard gave a grim little smile. Because after 30 years in this business, I've learned unopened evidence is the last clean thing some men ever touch. Daniel pulled the envelope toward himself. No label, no initials, slight water warping at one corner. He opened the flap carefully and tipped the contents onto the table. 4 glossy photographs slid out first, followed by a flash drive and a folded sheet torn from a ledger pad. No one spoke. Daniel looked at the photos one by one. The first showed a county-owned dump truck parked after dark near the old quarry access road. The second showed 2 men beside it, one clearly Neil Whitaker, the other partly turned away but broad-built, wearing a county road department jacket. The third photo froze, the dump truck bed tipped halfway up while dark debris spilled onto the ground. The fourth was the one that changed the room. Tyler Grant, alive, partially hidden behind scrub brush, phone in hand, photographing the scene. Timestamp in the corner. 8:29 p.m. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. Carla swore under her breath. Leonard sat back down slowly. That was in the envelope, he said. Daniel unfolded the note. It contained only 6 words in block letters. He saw too much. The room fell silent again, but now it was a different silence. Not uncertainty, but impact. Tyler hadn't simply been hit on a road. He had witnessed something. Illegal dumping, maybe, or worse, something county vehicles had no business hauling in the dark to the quarry entrance. Then somebody saw him see them. Daniel picked up the flash drive. You sure you didn't open this? I'm sure. Daniel looked at Carla. Laptop. She was already moving, pulling a slim department laptop from her bag, setting it on the table, booting it up with fingers that were steady only because she forced them to be. Daniel waded through the startup screen with a sensation he had felt only a handful of times in his career, that peculiar pressure when the case stops being theoretical and turns decisively toward structure. Not truth yet. Structure. Enough to see the shape of the thing you're dealing with. Carla inserted the drive. A single folder opened. Inside were 12 video clips and a series of scans labeled invoices. Daniel clicked the earliest clip. Grainy cell phone footage filled the screen. Tyler's breathing was audible, fast but controlled, along with the buzz of insects and the idling rumble of diesel. The frame shook as he zoomed toward the truck. Neil Whitaker stood in profile giving instructions to the road department man. Another voice from off-camera said, "Just get it down before sunrise." Then the lens dipped abruptly, and Tyler whispered, almost inaudibly, "Oh hell." The next clip began with hurried movement through brush, branches scraping the microphone, Tyler breathing harder now. A pair of headlights swung across the trees. Someone shouted in the distance, "Hey!" The video ended. Carla clicked another. This one was shorter, nearly total darkness. Footsteps, Tyler panting, then his voice, frightened in a way Daniel had never heard from him in life. "I'm just going home, man." A second voice, male, older, out of frame. "Hand me the phone," Tyler said. "No." There was a scuffling sound, a sharp grunt. Then the clip cut out. No one in the room moved. Daniel stared at the frozen black screen and felt something dark and hot settle under his sternum. It was not surprise. Surprise had already ended. This was grief acquiring direction, Carla opened the scan folder next. Invoices, county disposal records, road repair materials, fuel allotments, a string of signatures. Neil Whitaker's name appeared on subcontractor approvals. The county road supervisor, Ben Harlan, appeared on transfer slips. There were discrepancies even Daniel could spot at a glance. Weight entries that did not match. Dump destinations altered. After-hours transport authorizations signed under emergency maintenance codes on dry weather days. Fraud at minimum. Possibly environmental violations. Maybe theft. Tyler must have stumbled across them, burying something they didn't want on a ledger or in a landfill. Daniel pressed his palms against the table. Tyler filmed them dumping, he said quietly. They caught him. Tried to take the phone. He ran. Carla swallowed. Then they staged the hit and run. Leonard's voice came out rougher than before. That's what I feared. Daniel turned to him sharply. How long have you feared it? Leonard met his gaze. Since yesterday morning. And you said, nothing. Leonard's expression hardened, not defensive now, but ashamed. I had one look at Neil Whitaker in those photos before I sealed it back up. One look. That was enough. Carla stared at him, like she might actually strike him. Enough for what, exactly? Leonard did not look away. Enough to know the county commissioners would bury this if they had time. Enough to know if I moved wrong, the evidence would vanish, and maybe I would with it. Daniel could hear Maggie in his head, asking whether he was protecting people or using them as the reason to keep going. Different question, same moral trap. Fear could masquerade as strategy for a very long time. So you sat on it overnight, Daniel said. I sat on it for 6 hours while I decided whether the man I served under would bring in the state before trying to contain it. That hit harder than Daniel expected, perhaps because some part of him knew Leonard had not misread him entirely. Daniel did believe in local control. He had built a career on the idea that communities survived best when they took responsibility for their own failures. But there was a line after which local control became local corruption with nicer language. The photos on the table were that line. He looked at Carla. She held his eyes and he knew she was measuring whether he saw it too. He did. Call the bureau, Daniel said. Carla's face changed instantly, the tension in it redirecting from anger to action. Now. Now. Leonard exhaled, a sound close to relief and dread at once. Daniel pointed at the laptop. And call the State Environmental Crimes Unit. I want this mirrored before anybody blinks. Carla nodded, already moving toward the door with the laptop tucked under one arm and her phone in the other. Daniel stopped her. Use your personal cell first, not dispatch. Got it. She was gone. The front door shut. Daniel and Leonard sat alone at the table with the evidence between them. The muted weather report had rolled over to farm prices. Sunlight had advanced across the hardwood floor in a pale rectangle. Dust drifted through it. The domestic normalcy of the room now felt obscene. Daniel picked up the photo of Tyler behind the brush. He was a kid, he said. Leonard nodded once. Yeah. Daniel looked at him. Did you know? Not last night. Not for sure. Did you suspect Neil Whitaker before the envelope? Leonard took time with the answer. I suspected somebody protected by people who thought county property was private property. Neil fit the shape. Daniel leaned back and felt the ache in his ribs with fresh clarity. Adrenaline had been holding it off. Now that an external path existed, his body was starting to reclaim its complaints. Tom Whitaker ran me off the road, he said. Leonard's eyes snapped up. You can prove that. Not yet. Leonard stared at the photos, then shook his head slowly. Tom was always the meaner one. Daniel filed the phrasing away. Always. Something old there. You knew the family well? Leonard gave a humorless smile. In this county, everybody knows the family well. Some of us just had more reason to keep score. Daniel waited. Leonard looked toward the family portrait on the wall, and for the first time Daniel saw where the fatigue in him truly lived. Not in age, in damage. 10 years ago, my daughter was driving back from Salina after a choir thing, Leonard said. A Whitaker truck clipped her at an intersection. Nothing fatal. Broken wrist, concussion. The deputy on scene wrote it up clean. By Monday, the witness statement had changed, and the insurance claim got complicated. We kept paying lawyers until my wife got tired of living angry and moved south to be near her sister. He shrugged once, tiny and bitter. That's not all on the Whitakers, but it's not none of it either. Daniel listened without interrupting. He understood then what he had missed all these years. Leonard's faith in order had not come from contentment. It came from surviving what happened when order bent for the wrong people. Why stay? Daniel asked. Leonard gave the only answer men like them ever really had. Because if you leave, they learn they were right. The words settled in the room. Daniel thought of Ashbrook, of all the places across the country built by people who confused endurance with virtue until corruption became part of the local weather. He thought of Maggie at the kitchen table and Eli asleep or maybe already awake in Wichita, unaware his father was about to drag their family name into a public fight with county money and political reach behind it. He thought of Tyler's mother and the question she had asked. Was my boy scared? Daniel looked down at the video file list again. The answer was yes. Tyler had been scared, and he had still said no when they demanded the phone. Something fierce and sorrowful moved through Daniel at that. Courage rarely looked grand when it happened. It looked like a frightened teenager refusing to hand over proof to older men who thought fear entitled them to obedience. Carla came back in 7 minutes, breathing hard from the pace rather than panic. State Bureau says hold the scene and evidence exactly as is, she said. 2 agents out of Topeka are already en route. Environmental Crimes Unit is looping in the Attorney General's office because of the county equipment angle. She looked at Daniel. They asked whether local officials are compromised. Daniel answered without hesitation. Yes. Carla nodded as if she had expected no other answer. Then they want nobody alerted except personnel absolutely necessary for preservation and officer safety. Daniel stood. The room seemed to tilt for half a second, and he put a hand on the back of the chair until it passed. Leonard noticed. You need a doctor before a tactical briefing. What I need, Daniel said, straightening, is Ben Harlan found before Neil Whitaker finds out the state is coming. Carla was already with him. Road supervisor starts at the county depot at 8. Daniel looked at the wall clock. 7:12. Not much time. Holt? Carla checked her phone. On his way in. Daniel nodded. Good. We pick up Harlan quietly. No cuffs unless he gives us a reason. We separate him before anybody whispers his name. Leonard rose too. I'm coming. Daniel turned to him. There was a long pause while both men weighed the years between them. The doubt, the failure, the fact that trust once cracked never reassembled in its original shape. But this was no longer about purity. It was about utility and burden, and who would have to stand in which room saying which truths out loud. You ride with Ruiz, Daniel said, and you talk the second he starts lying. Leonard gave one short nod. No gratitude. None needed. Daniel pulled out his phone then, before he could postpone it again, and stepped toward the front window where the signal was strongest. He scrolled to Eli's name and hit call. The ring sounded louder than it should have in the quiet house. 1 ring. 2. 3. Then a groggy voice. Dad? Daniel stared out at the wet street. At a woman walking a golden retriever past Leonard Orson's mailbox. At a newspaper lying folded in a neighbor's driveway. At a world still pretending to be ordinary. Yeah, he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. It's me. Everything okay? There it was, the distance in the question. Not cold, just careful. Daniel closed his eyes for 1 second and made himself answer as a father, not a sheriff, not a man with a case unfolding around him like a storm, just a father speaking before the day swallowed the chance. No, he said. Not really. But your mom is safe, and I'm going to need you to hear some hard things from me before you hear them from anybody else. He heard Eli sit up on the other end, heard the change in breathing, the old instinct of a son, recognizing that whatever came next mattered. Daniel looked back at Carla, gathering the evidence. At Leonard, standing beside the table with his damaged shoulder slightly lowered. At the photographs of a dead boy who had seen too much, and he understood with sudden painful clarity that the next hours were not going to clean anything. They were going to expose it. And exposure, unlike resolution, always had a body count of its own. Eli was quiet for 2 full seconds, and Daniel could hear the shift from sleep to alertness happening across the line, the way a young man tried to steady his breathing when he sensed that childhood was about to be forced on him again in the form of family crisis. Is Mom hurt? Eli asked. No, Daniel said. She's okay. He kept his eyes on the street because if he looked back into the room at the evidence, his voice would change into something too official. I was in a wreck last night. What kind of wreck? The kind I don't think was an accident. He heard Eli inhale sharply. The old instinct to soften it rose in Daniel and then died. Softening had cost them enough already. I'm standing. I'm talking. But there's more going on here than a traffic crash, and it may get loud before the day's over. He could picture Eli now in that cramped apartment in Wichita, sitting on the edge of an unmade bed, one hand gripping the phone, dark hair falling into his eyes the way it had since middle school. Daniel had not seen him in person in nearly 4 months, yet the image came with painful ease. Why are you telling me like this? Eli asked, not accusing. Just direct. Older now, Daniel swallowed. Because your mother told me if this reached you through gossip, before it reached you through family, she'd never forgive me. A short silence. Then, unexpectedly, Eli let out a faint breath that almost sounded like a laugh, or maybe just disbelief wearing the shape of one. That sounds like her. Daniel closed his eyes for half a second. Yeah. Another beat passed. What do you need from me? Eli said. The question landed harder than Daniel expected. Not what happened. Not why. What do you need from me? For years, Daniel had behaved as though the answer to that question should always be nothing, as though needing anything from his son would be an admission of weakness or failure or misplaced hierarchy. Now, standing in Leonard Orson's living room with corruption laid out on a dining table, he understood how much damage that reflex had done. Right now, he said carefully, I need you not to come charging down here unless I ask you to. He heard Eli exhale through his nose. So you do need something. Yeah. Daniel's voice dropped. And I need you to know this isn't because I don't want you here. It's because if this town starts spinning, I need to know where you are. The line went quiet again. Daniel wondered if he had said it badly, if even now he had wrapped concern and command so tightly that the tenderness got lost. Then Eli said, more softly, Okay. Daniel leaned one shoulder against the wall near the window. Pain moved through his ribs like heat under the skin. Your mom may call too. She won't have to. Another pause. Dad. Daniel braced instinctively. Yeah. Don't shut her out today. The words were plain. They went straight in. Daniel opened his eyes and looked at the street, at the dog walker turning the corner, at a boy on a bike pedaling one-handed with a backpack bouncing against his spine, at the harmlessness of morning and the complete fraud of it. I'm trying not to, he said. Try harder. Daniel almost smiled, though it hurt. Fair. Eli hesitated. And don't do that thing where you sound calm when you're not. Daniel looked down at the floorboards and felt a strange mixture of grief and pride. The boy knew him too well. Maybe he always had. I'm not calm, Daniel said. Good, Eli replied. Call me when you can. I will. The call ended. Daniel stood there a second longer with the dead screen in his hand. Behind him, Leonard and Carla had finished bagging the photographs and drive into temporary evidence sleeves. The room smelled now of paper, cooling coffee, and the sharp plastic scent of new evidence bags. Daniel slipped the phone into his pocket and turned back. We move, he said. The county road depot sat at the southern edge of Ashbrook, beyond the co-op silos and two weathered machine sheds, a practical spread of gravel, cinderblock garages, fuel tanks, and mud-streaked county trucks, lined like tired animals after a storm. By the time they arrived, the day had brightened fully. A pale sun stood behind thin clouds, casting the sort of flat Kansas light that made everything look simultaneously exposed and drained of color. Holt was already there in an unmarked sedan, parked 2 lots over from the main gate, where he could watch without looking like he was watching. He stepped out as Daniel approached. Harlan's truck is here, he said quietly. Blue Ford by Bay 3. Daniel nodded. Anyone with him? Couple road crew guys, no Whitakers. Daniel glanced across the lot. Men in reflective vests were moving cones and checking tires. Diesel fumes hung in the cool air. Somewhere, an impact wrench barked twice and went silent. It was the kind of ordinary municipal morning that could swallow a crime and call it administration. Carla came up on Daniel's left, Leonard a step behind her. Daniel looked at Orson. You stay outside until I call you in. Leonard accepted that, without complaint. Holt opened the pedestrian gate, and they walked in, boots crunching over wet gravel. Ben Harlan stood near an open garage bay with a clipboard tucked under one arm, talking to a mechanic over the hood of a grader. He was in his late 40s, square-bodied, with the permanent red neck of a man who spent more time outdoors than not, though his belly and pressed county jacket suggested he had risen just far enough in management to stop doing the hardest labor himself. When he saw Daniel coming, he smiled automatically, then lost the smile as he took in the faces behind him. Sheriff, he said, something wrong. Daniel stopped a few feet away. Need a word, Ben. Harlan's eyes flicked once toward Carla, once toward Holt, then back to Daniel. A fast assessment. Not yet panic. Sure. He turned to the mechanic. Give me a minute. The mechanic glanced between them and retreated into the bay. Daniel gestured toward the side of the garage, away from the others. Harlan followed, boots leaving damp prints in the oil-stained concrete. The air inside the bay was colder, metallic, full of grease, wet rubber, and the lingering heat of engines that had started early. Sunlight cut through the open door in bright rectangles. Daniel positioned himself so Harlan had open space behind him, and no reason to feel cornered unless his own conscience did the work. You know Tyler Grant, Daniel said. Harlan blinked. Everybody knew Tyler. That wasn't my question. Harlan swallowed once. Knew him to see him. Daniel watched the man's throat move. When did you last see him alive? Harlan's face did something subtle and damning then. Not a full collapse, but a tiny attempt to reset itself before answering. I don't know. Daniel held his gaze. Try again. Harlan looked past him toward the lot, toward escape or witness, or maybe just daylight. I heard about the boy same as everybody else. Daniel reached into the evidence envelope Carla had handed him and pulled out the fourth photograph. Tyler behind the brush with phone in hand. He didn't wave it. He simply held it out at chest height between them. Harlan looked at it. All the blood drained from his face so quickly, it seemed to happen in a single pulse. He took one involuntary step back. Holt moved slightly to close the angle. Harlan noticed that too. Ben, Daniel said, voice low and even. This is the point where you decide whether you want to be a witness or a defendant. Harlan's mouth opened. No sound came out. Daniel let him sit in the silence. The impact wrench outside kicked on again, louder this time, then cut off. Somebody laughed in the lot, unaware. A gull cried overhead from nowhere near water, the sound thin and misplaced. Harlan wiped one hand down the front of his jacket. I didn't touch that boy, he said finally. Daniel's expression did not change. That's not enough. I didn't. Then tell me what is. Harlan looked at the photo again, and Daniel saw the exact second shame entered the man's face and fought with fear for space. Shame did not make him innocent. It just made him human enough to hurt. Neil said, it was scrap, Harlan muttered. What? The loads. He said Whitaker Construction had county authorization to move storm debris to the quarry access, temporarily, until the west transfer site reopened. Carla, standing just to Daniel's side, said, the west transfer site never closed. Harlan looked at her as if he hadn't realized she might speak. That's what I found out later. Daniel kept his eyes on him. What were you dumping? Harlan's breathing had become shallow now. Concrete chunks. Asphalt millings. Some drums. I never opened the drums. Daniel felt the temperature in the room change without actually changing. Drums, illegal disposal, environmental crimes, fraud. County equipment used to bury it. Tyler had filmed the process. How many nights? Daniel asked. Harlan shook his head quickly. I don't know. Few months maybe. Neil handled paperwork. Said the county would get a cut on the back end through subcontract offsets. Daniel almost felt sorry for him, which made him angry. Men like Ben Harlan wanted moral discounts for not asking questions when the questions were obviously dangerous. And Tyler, Harlan's face twisted. He was there, came out from the brush with that phone in his hand. Neil saw him first. The bay seemed to shrink around the words. Daniel could hear his own pulse now, heavy and controlled. What happened? Harlan pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes for a moment, and then dropped them. Neil told him to hand over the phone. The kid took off. I told Neil, let him go. Just let him go. But Tom was there too, and he got in his truck and went after him. Daniel went still. Tom too. He had expected it, maybe, but hearing it made everything narrower and sharper. You followed. No. Harlan shook his head harder. No. I stayed with the truck. Daniel took a step closer. Ben. Harlan flinched. I heard shouting down the road. Then I heard brakes. Then nothing. Tom came back 5, maybe 10 minutes later, in Neil's SUV, with Neil driving behind him in the truck. Tom said the boy ran into the road. Said it was done. Daniel stared at him. Done. Harlan looked sick now. Those were his words. Daniel let the silence press. And you believed that? I believed, if I said otherwise, I'd be next. Daniel had heard variants of that sentence his whole career. Sometimes it came from abused wives, sometimes from low-level dealers, sometimes from clerks who looked the other way while bosses stole public money. It was usually true. It was almost never sufficient. Carla spoke again, colder than before. So, instead, you helped cover a child's death. Harlan shook his head helplessly. I drove the county truck back. Neil said he'd fix the scene. Said the sheriff would call it a hit and run if the phone was gone and the right report got moved around. Daniel felt a fresh wave of anger at the phrase moved around. Not erased, not falsified, moved around. Administrative language used as moral anesthetic. Where's the phone? Daniel asked. Harlan froze. I never had it. Daniel searched his face and believed that part. Not because Harlan deserved belief, but because terror made people careful in specific ways. And this felt like one of them. Where are the drums coming from? Harlan looked trapped by the question, as if this was the point beyond which his knowledge became a direct bridge to his own destruction. Daniel saw it and pushed harder. Ben. The old fertilizer plant, Harlan blurted. Outside Miller's Crossing, Carla said. That place has been shut 20 years. Harlan nodded frantically. Whitaker bought the parcel through a holding company. Said they were clearing residual stock for redevelopment. I swear to God I never saw what was in the barrels. Daniel looked at Carla. That was enough for the state, and probably enough for search warrants if they moved fast. He turned back to Harlan. You're coming with us. Harlan's shoulders sagged in a way Daniel recognized. Not relief exactly. Surrender before the body had even decided to call it that. Am I under arrest? Daniel considered the yard outside, the road crewmen glancing over now more openly, the speed at which rumor would travel if cuffs came out in public, and the even greater speed at which Neil Whitaker would vanish if they lost another 15 minutes to spectacle. No, he said. Yet. Harlan closed his eyes briefly. Can I tell my wife? From the station. Holt stepped forward and guided him toward the sedan. Harlan did not resist. Daniel watched him go, then turned toward the lot just as a black SUV rolled slowly past the depot entrance without stopping. Tinted windows, clean body, familiar shape. Daniel's entire nervous system sharpened at once. The SUV continued down the frontage road and disappeared beyond the fuel tanks. Holt saw his expression. What? Nothing good, Daniel said. He pulled out his phone and called Carla's contact at the State Bureau directly. When the agent answered, Daniel didn't waste a word. Move faster, he said. They may already know. The station became a machine after that. Not efficient exactly, but committed. Harlan went into interview 2 with Holt posted outside and Carla running recorder. Daniel called in the county attorney, only long enough to inform him that jurisdiction on the emerging case was shifting to the state and that he was to notify no commissioners until state agents arrived. The man protested, sputtered, asked whether Daniel had lost his mind, and Daniel told him, maybe, but I still outrank your panic for the next 30 minutes, then hung up. Leonard sat at the front desk, copying down dates, contract numbers, and every Whitaker-linked county transaction he could remember from the last year. For a man who had spent most of the morning under suspicion, he now moved with grim purpose, as if a private verdict on himself had already been reached, and the only thing left was usefulness. Daniel paced between rooms, every step reminding him his body had not agreed to this workload. His temple pounded, his ribs burned. Twice Carla told him to sit down. Twice he ignored her. The third time she stepped into his path near the copy room and spoke so quietly he had to stop to hear it. You fall over now. I will be furious while they scan your head. Daniel looked at her. That compassion. It's management. He gave a tired nod and leaned against the wall for 10 seconds. No more, while she handed him a bottle of water. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Phones rang in other rooms. Through the narrow lobby windows he could see the town crossing into late morning. Pickup after pickup, moving through Main Street. Ordinary life continuing to insist on itself. It struck him then that exposure did not change communities all at once. Most people in Ashbrook were probably buying groceries, fixing fence posts, dropping kids at practice, completely unaware that the story they told themselves about who ran their county and why was cracking open in a brick station house on Walnut Avenue. Daniel took a drink and closed his eyes. Tyler behind the brush. I'm just going home, man. The words would not leave him. Maggie's note, under the windshield. Eli saying, don't do that thing where you sound calm when you're not. Everything was connected now, not by mystery but by consequence. That made it worse in some ways. Mystery let you imagine a clean answer waiting somewhere. Consequence only asked whether you could endure the truth once it arrived. State Bureau agents Andrea Voss and Michael Tenley came through the front doors at 9. 43 inches windbreakers over suits, both carrying hard cases, and the sort of contained alertness Daniel had always associated with people whose authority derived less from charisma than from process. Voss was first through the door, mid-40s, dark braid, sharp brown eyes that flicked across the room and registered everything in one sweep. Tenley followed with a tablet already in hand. Daniel met them halfway. Introductions were brief. He took them straight to the evidence table. They reviewed the photographs, the drive, the note, Harlan's preliminary oral statement, the missing file log, the crash damage report on Daniel's truck, and the threat note left for Maggie. Voss listened without interruption, only once asking Daniel to repeat Tom Whitaker's exact wording on the highway. Be a shame if things got worse, Daniel said. Voss wrote it down. Her face gave away nothing. When he finished, she looked at him for a long second. Sheriff, from this point forward, you understand this is a state-led homicide and corruption case. I do. You also understand you may be a target and a witness. I do. And your local chain may be contaminated. Daniel glanced at Leonard through the glass of interview. 2. Yeah. Voss followed the glance, took in Orson's position in the building, and said, for now he stays useful, but nobody moves alone. Tenley was already imaging the flash drive while Carla transferred Harlan's recorded statement to a secure folder. Through the interview room window, Daniel could see Harlan hunched forward, hands clasped between his knees, looking like a man who had spent years avoiding mirrors and finally found one large enough. Voss asked, "Where are Neil and Tom now?" Daniel answered, "If they know we're this far in, they're either lawyering up or cleaning." Voss nodded once. "Then we go now." Search warrants on the quarry access road and the old fertilizer plant began moving through the judge's chambers by emergency request. A quiet pickup team left for Neil Whitaker's office. Another rolled toward Tom's property outside town. Daniel wanted to be in both places at once. Instead, Voss assigned him and Carla to Denise Grant. "You owe her the truth before the new news does," she said. "And if there's anything else," Tyler told her, "I want it before defense attorneys turn her memory into a battlefield." Daniel did not argue. The drive to Denise's house might have been the longest 10 minutes of his adult life. Ashbrook looked unchanged in daylight. Kids on a school playground. 2 women laughing outside the bakery. A farm supply truck unloading seed pallets. The sameness of it made his chest hurt more than his ribs did. Carla drove because Daniel's focus kept slipping at stop signs. Denise Grant lived in a 1-story rental duplex near the railroad tracks on the west side of town, the less polished side where lawns went patchy in summer, and people fixed what they could because there was no spare money for replacement. Plastic flowers still drooped beside the front steps from Tyler's funeral service 3 days earlier. Daniel got out slowly. Carla came around to his side, ready if he needed help. He hated that he might. He also knew pride was becoming an unaffordable luxury. Denise opened the door before they knocked. She had the look of someone who had not slept more than a few minutes at a time since grief entered the house. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back loose. She wore one of Tyler's old hoodies over leggings and socks. When she saw Daniel's face, the bruise, the cut, the stiffness, her own expression changed from exhaustion to dread. "You found something," she said. Daniel took off his hat. "Can we come in?" She stepped aside without another word. The living room was small and painfully tidy, as if order might keep sorrow from spreading. School photos lined the mantel. A football trophy sat crooked beside a candle burned low. Tyler's cleats were by the door, where someone had taken them off and never had the chance to do it again. Daniel felt the air go thin in his lungs. Denise sat but did not lean back, hands gripping each other so tightly her knuckles whitened. Carla remained by the archway to the kitchen, present but respectfully distant. Daniel lowered himself into the chair opposite Denise and told her the truth, as carefully as truth allowed. He told her Tyler had witnessed county dumping activity tied to the Whitakers. He told her Tyler had recorded it. He told her there was evidence men confronted him before his death, and that the hit-and-run theory was no longer being treated as real. He did not soften the fact that Tyler had likely been chased. He did not mention every word from the clip, not yet. Not while she sat with eyes fixed on him like someone bracing for impact she had already felt once. Denise listened without interrupting until he said, "We believe your son tried to protect what he saw." And then she folded in on herself as if something internal had finally broken its last support. No scream. No dramatics, just a terrible sound dragged up from somewhere too deep for language. Carla moved instantly, kneeling beside her, but Denise reached instead for Daniel's wrist with surprising strength. "He was alone," she whispered. Daniel could barely get the answer out. Not at the end for long. Denise shook her head sharply, tears finally coming now in great breathless waves that seemed to frighten her with their force. "I kept telling him not to be brave for everybody, since he was little, always sticking up for somebody. Always thinking if he saw wrong, he had to say wrong." She pressed a fist against her mouth and then looked at Daniel with a rawness he knew would stay with him the rest of his life. Did he know they were going to kill him? Daniel sat perfectly still because any movement felt like disrespect. "I don't know," he said. And because the truth demanded the rest, he added, "But I know he didn't give them what they wanted." Denise closed her eyes. Her shoulders shook once, twice. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Grief was still there, but something else had entered beside it. A narrow blade of furious clarity. "Then don't you let them make him into paperwork." Daniel felt the words strike something sacred in him. "I won't." Denise nodded once and wiped at her face with the sleeve of Tyler's hoodie. "What do you need from me?" The question echoed Eli's from earlier, and Daniel almost couldn't bear the symmetry of it, the way good people kept offering what they had left, while the powerful built lives out of taking. He said, anything Tyler said that seemed small at the time. Any names. Any place he went that week that felt off. Any fights. Denise stared at the floor, thinking. After a moment she said, "The night before he died, he asked if we still had his granddaddy's old lockbox key." Daniel looked up. "What key?" "My father kept papers in a tackle box with a padlock." Tyler had found the key in a drawer once when he was little and thought it looked like treasure. Denise rubbed her forehead. I told him I didn't know where it was. He seemed disappointed. I asked why, and he said, nothing, just wondering. Daniel and Carla exchanged a look. Daniel said, did Tyler have a lockbox? Denise shook her head. No, but he had a metal tin under his bed he kept baseball cards in when he was younger. Carla moved immediately toward the bedroom. May I? Denise nodded. Second door. Daniel stayed with her in the living room while Carla searched. Denise's breathing had slowed, but the force of her grief remained in the room like weather after a tornado. The air itself altered. Daniel knew enough not to fill silence just because it hurt. After about 40 seconds, Carla called softly from the bedroom. Dan. He stood, pain flashing through his side, and followed her. Tyler's room was small. Blue walls, school pennants, a weight bench by the window, laundry stacked clean on a chair, the sweet stale smell of a boy's room that had been closed too long. Carla knelt by the bed, holding an old metal card tin. Inside, beneath a stack of rookie cards and loose change, sat a cheap prepaid phone wrapped in a gym sock. Daniel looked at it and felt the final arc of the case begin to close around them. Tyler had known enough to hide a second device. Smart kid, careful kid, brave kid. Too brave for the town that claimed to raise boys right, and then taught men with power how to bury them. Daniel took the burner phone gently, as if it were made of something breakable beyond circuitry. When he turned it over, a strip of masking tape on the back held one word in Tyler's handwriting. Backup. Daniel stood in the middle of Tyler Grant's bedroom, with the small phone in his hand, and felt the whole case shift from accusation to inevitability. The masking tape label, the careful hiding place, the cheap burner chosen precisely because nobody looking for a teenager's main phone would think to check for a second one. All of it revealed not just fear, but planning. Tyler had understood enough to create insurance. Daniel imagined the boy in this very room, door shut, shoulders tight, peeling a strip of tape and writing backup with a marker, while the house around him went on breathing in its normal sounds. His mother, in the kitchen, the television on low, a train moaning far off on the tracks. Ordinary life continuing while he decided how to protect what he'd seen. The thought hollowed Daniel out. Carla took an evidence bag from her pocket and held it open. Daniel slid the phone inside. We need this to Voss now, she said. Daniel nodded, but neither of them moved immediately. The room itself seemed to demand a second of witness. Tyler's life was everywhere, not in grand memorial fashion, but in the loose, unfinished grammar of a person who expected to keep living. A spiral notebook lay open on the desk with half a geometry problem worked out and abandoned. A cracked baseball sat on the windowsill. A dumbbell plate leaned against the bed frame where it had probably been left after some interrupted burst of discipline. On the closet door hung 2 dress shirts, still in plastic, from a funeral home pickup, one of them likely bought for graduation or church, now trapped in the wrong future. Daniel looked at the room and understood with painful force that justice, if it came, would not restore anything here. It would only stop the theft from spreading further. Carla touched his elbow lightly. Dan. He turned, and they went back to the living room. Denise was standing now, arms wrapped around herself, looking toward the hallway with that stunned, fixed attention grief produces when it knows something important is happening just out of sight. Daniel held up the evidence bag. This may help us finish it, he said. Denise stared at the phone for a long moment. He hid that from me. There was no accusation in her voice, just the bewilderment of a mother realizing her child had carried fear alone to spare her. He was trying to protect what he knew, Daniel said. Denise nodded once, tears pushing up again but not falling yet. Then go use it. Daniel stepped closer. Agents from the state are moving on the people involved. I'm going to stay with this until it's done. Denise searched his face, not for confidence but for sincerity. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her because she said, then don't come back here with half-truths. I won't. Carla promised to have an officer from the State Victim Services Unit contact her before the hour was out. Then they left. The afternoon light had sharpened outside, clear and unforgiving after the rain. Children's voices carried from the elementary school yard 2 blocks away. Somewhere nearby, someone was mowing, the dry mechanical whine drifting over fences and through the open air like nothing in the world had changed. Daniel got into the cruiser and shut the door harder than he meant to. The enclosed silence inside the vehicle made the ache in his head feel louder. Carla started the engine and pulled away from the curb. For a few blocks, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "You okay to finish this?" Daniel looked out the passenger window at the passing houses. "No. Good. You already used that one. Still true." He almost smiled. It hurt less than before. They called Voss from the car. She answered on the first ring. Daniel put her on speaker and gave the update in plain sequence. Burn phone hidden in bedroom. Label indicated intentional backup. Denise confirmed Tyler had asked about a lockbox key the night before he died. Voss listened, then said, "Bring it straight to the annex. Tenley's got a portable extraction rig set up. We already have one warrant signed, and the second judge is leaning yes." "Status on the Whitakers?" Daniel asked. Neil's office was empty when the team arrived. Secretary says he stepped out 20 minutes earlier. Tom wasn't at the farm. "We've got units watching routes out of county." Daniel felt a hard disappointment move through him, not surprise exactly, but the bitter confirmation that exposure had reached them fast enough to trigger movement. "Any word on the fertilizer plant?" "Search team is staging now. Environmental unit wants protective gear on site before they cut a drum." Daniel looked at Carla. "We're coming in," Voss added. "And Mercer." "What?" "You need a medic to at least glance at you when you get here." "That's not optional anymore." Daniel opened his mouth to refuse, then shut it again. There were battles that preserved dignity, and battles that only wasted time. "Fine," he said. The annex conference room had been turned into a temporary command post by the time they arrived. Maps taped to the walls, laptops open, case boxes stacked under folding tables, coffee multiplying in paper cups like a species adapted to institutional crisis. Tenley had the extraction station running in one corner beside two technicians from the bureau. Voss stood over a county map with Leonard Orson, and one environmental investigator in a windbreaker, identifying routes between the quarry road, the fertilizer plant, and Whitaker-owned parcels. The whole room carried that particular energy of competent people working too fast, because they understood exactly how much would be lost if they did not. Daniel handed the bagged burner phone to Tenley. "Handle carefully," he said, and hated how unnecessary the instruction sounded. Tenley gave him a flat look that implied state-level homicide investigators were, in fact, familiar with phones. "I'll do my best." Carla moved to Voss and began relaying Denise's full statement. Daniel got intercepted by a medic in Navy scrubs before he reached the map table. The medic was young, brisk, and entirely uninterested in local hierarchy. He took Daniel's blood pressure, shined a light in his eyes, pressed fingers against his ribs until Daniel swore, and said, "You should be in radiology. I should be in 3 places at once. You've got probable cracked ribs and a mild concussion. Sheriff, can you fix either one in 5 minutes? No, then put it in writing and let me keep moving." The medic studied him, then handed over 2 pain tablets and a bottle of water. "If you black out, I get to say I told you so." Daniel swallowed the pills dry enough that the medic visibly disapproved. Voss caught his eye across the room and crooked one finger toward the map. "Harlan gave us more," she said when he reached her. "After he heard we found the backup phone, he stopped trying to protect his own imagination." She pointed to 3 circled parcels south of Miller's Crossing. Whitaker Shell Companies bought contaminated land cheap, then billed the county through fake remediation and road repair contracts while illegally dumping hazardous leftovers off-book. The quarry road was temporary overflow when the plant site started saturating. Daniel stared at the map. Fraud, theft, environmental crimes, obstruction, murder. A whole architecture of it. How many knew? Leonard answered before Voss could. "Enough to sign things without reading, and a few to read things without speaking." Daniel looked at him. Leonard looked older than he had that morning, but steadier too, as if once the moral confusion lifted, all that remained was fatigue. "What about commissioners?" Daniel asked. Voss said, 2 are being interviewed. One says Neil handled public works relationships personally. The other has already retained counsel, which tells me more than any answer. Daniel ran a hand over his face. The skin around the cut on his brow felt tight and tender. "And Tom." Voss's expression changed just slightly, enough for him to know the update would not be clean. Deputy on the outer perimeter near Route 18 spotted a black sedan registered to a Whitaker subcontractor, leaving a grain elevator access road. Vehicle fled. Short pursuit. Driver bailed into fields. "We've got teams searching." Daniel's body reacted before thought finished forming. "Where?" Voss named the location. Daniel knew it instantly. Open farmland, irrigation ditches, abandoned structures, enough room to disappear for hours if you knew the ground. "Tom grew up hunting that area," Daniel said. Voss gave him a level look. "I assumed you'd know that." Carla turned from the table. "Then he's not just running blind, he's heading somewhere." Daniel's mind moved through the old county geography. Farm lanes, empty sheds, family holdings, who owed which Whitaker favors. Then a smaller, more dangerous thought cut through the rest. Maggie. He reached for his phone. She answered on the second ring. "Dan, where are you?" "At home. Inside." "Yes." He closed his eyes briefly. "Do not leave. I wasn't planning a picnic." He could hear tension under the attempt at normal tone. State units are moving on, Tom. He may be loose. The pause on the line told him she understood exactly what that meant. Do you want me to call Eli? I already talked to him. Another small silence. How was he? Daniel looked at the map, and for one brief second, let himself feel the answer, rather than package it. Better than I've deserved. Maggie's voice softened in that way it had not in months. Then maybe use that, he almost answered. But Voss was already issuing instructions behind him, and the room had begun to shift into tactical rhythm. I'll call again, he said. You'd better. He ended the call and looked at Voss. I'm coming on the field search. She studied him, took in the bruising, the fatigue, the probable headache hammering behind his eyes, and seemed ready to say no. Then her gaze flicked to the county map, to the patches of land only a local could read, as more than shapes. You know the ditches and service lanes? Better than your team does. Fine, but you stay with a unit, and you listen when I tell you to stop being the hero in your own county. I was never that to begin with. Tenley spoke from the extraction table. Hold up. Everyone turned. He had the burner phone hooked to the rig, one gloved finger scrolling through recovered content. Phone's damaged but not dead. Messages intact. There's a draft email unsent. Multiple photos. One audio memo. Daniel moved closer. On the screen, Tyler's name sat atop a half-finished draft addressed not to police, not to his mother, but to someone labeled Coach M. Subject line, if anything happens. Daniel felt the room go still around him. Tenley opened it. The draft was brief, typed in the fast, imperfect rhythm of fear. Coach, those men are dumping bad stuff by the old quarry, and Neil Whitaker is there. I got video. If they take my phone, there's another one at home. Don't tell my mom first because she'll panic. Tell Sheriff Mercer because he'll make them answer. Daniel stared at the words until they blurred. He became aware only dimly of the people in the room, of Carla's sharp inhale, of Leonard taking one step back and looking away, of Voss standing very still beside him. The sentence that hit hardest was not the accusation. It was the faith. Tell Sheriff Mercer, because he'll make them answer. Daniel had spent so much of the last year failing privately, in his marriage, with his son, in his own sense of proportion, that the idea a dead boy had trusted him more cleanly than he trusted himself felt like a blow. Carla touched the table edge, grounding herself. He meant to tell you. Daniel nodded once, though he wasn't sure anyone asked. Tenley clicked open the audio memo. Tyler's whisper filled the room, thinner through cheap speakers, but unmistakably him. If somebody finds this and I don't get to say it myself, the one with Neil is Ben Harlan, and the other one is Tom Whitaker. Tom chased me. I'm by County 7. I can hear them. Then breathing. Rustling. A muttered curse. Far off. An older male voice shouting. The memo cut out. No one spoke for several seconds after it ended. Voss broke the silence first. That's enough. Her voice held no drama, only professional finality. We arrest on sight. The search moved fast after that. Daniel rode with Carla and a bureau tactical agent named Sloan in an SUV that smelled of nylon gear, coffee, and dust. They crossed out of town under a hard white noon sky, heading west and then south along farm roads Daniel had driven since he was 16. The landscape stretched open and deceptively gentle. Flat fields just beginning to green. Windbreaks of cottonwood. Metal irrigation rigs resting like skeletal insects across acres of dark earth. Grain bins flashing in the sun. Beauty was one of the crueler features of places like this. It made people think corruption had to come from somewhere uglier. Sloan drove while Carla monitored radio traffic. Daniel watched fence lines and access roads slide past and tried to think like Tom Whitaker. Not purely as prey, as entitlement under pressure. Tom would not imagine himself cornered. Men like him rarely did. He would imagine himself temporarily inconvenienced by lesser people who had mistaken paperwork and procedure for real power. That meant he would run toward familiarity, toward assets, toward spaces he believed already belonged to him. Turn at the old pump station, Daniel said suddenly. Sloan did. Carla looked over. Why? There's a service shed half a mile east. Used to store irrigation parts. Whitaker's leased adjacent land in the 90s. Sloan keyed the radio, relayed the direction, and pushed the SUV harder over the rutted track. The ride sent knives through Daniel's ribs with every dip. He gritted his teeth and kept watching. Wind slapped dry weeds along the ditch. A red-tailed hawk lifted from a fence post and drifted low across the field. Then he saw it. A glint where no glint should be. Sun on glass through the cottonwoods near the shed. There, he said. Sloan killed speed at once and rolled the vehicle behind a low berm. They got out into a hot wind, smelling of dirt and diesel. The tactical agent raised binoculars. Black sedan, he said. Engine off. Carla checked her weapon. Daniel listened. No voices. No doors. Just wind in the scrub and the faint tin rattle of the old shed roof. Sloan spoke into his radio and 2 other units began closing from the north lane. Daniel looked at the ground. Tire marks fresh in the dust. One set. Driver likely alone, or waiting for help that had not come. They advanced on foot through knee-high grass. Daniel moved slower than the others because of his ribs, and every slow step made him angry at his body. But anger had become such a constant presence that it almost steadied him now. Near the shed, Sloan signaled halt. The sedan sat partly hidden behind a collapsed fence line. Empty. Driver door open. Daniel's eyes moved instantly to the structure. Old corrugated metal walls, one sliding door half off track, shadows pooled inside. "Tom," Carla shouted. "State Bureau, come out." Wind took the words and flattened them against the field. No answer. Sloan moved left, another agent right. Daniel approached the door from the center because that was stupid, and he knew it. But some stupidities are just loyalty to old habits by another name. Inside the shed, the air was cooler and smelled of rust, mice, stale fuel, and dry grain dust. Light came through, holes in the roof in thin spears. Shelving leaned crooked against one wall. A generator sat dead in the corner. And near the back, half hidden behind stacked PVC pipe, Tom Whitaker stood with a revolver loose at his side, face drawn and sunburned. No hat now, just sweat-dark hair and eyes bright with the brittle intensity of a man who had run out of moves and still refused to call it that. "Don't," Carla said sharply. Tom laughed once, too loud in the metal room. "Don't what?" Sloan had his weapon trained. "Set it down." Tom looked at Daniel instead. "You really brought the state down on your own county." Daniel stopped about 15 feet away. "You did that." Tom's mouth tightened. That kid should have minded his business. The sentence was so naked, so utterly unembarrassed in its moral vacancy, that Daniel felt his entire body go still. "He was 17, Daniel said. "He was in the way." Tom shrugged one shoulder, the gesture almost casual. Things happened fast. Daniel could feel Carla beside him, rigid with controlled fury. Sloan repeated, "Weapon down." Tom ignored him. His gaze remained on Daniel, and Daniel understood suddenly that this last moment mattered to Tom, not as law, but as status. He needed to believe he was still dealing man to man, power to power, not simply being arrested by the machinery he had always mocked. "You think putting cuffs on me changes the county," Tom said. "It doesn't. Men like me built the roads you stand on." Daniel took one slow breath. "No, men like you used public money to poison the ground and kill a boy when he saw it." Tom's eyes flickered then, not with remorse but with rage finally stripped of polish. That boy panicked. "No," Daniel said. He refused. The word hit. Tom knew it. Daniel saw it in the way his jaw shifted, in the instant his grip changed on the revolver. Sloan shouted, "Drop it!" Tom raised the gun, not fully toward Daniel, not yet, perhaps toward the idea of leverage, perhaps toward suicide, perhaps toward one last confusion of dominance with choice. He never completed the motion. Carla's voice cracked through the shed like a whip. Now. And maybe it was her. Maybe the closing footsteps outside. Maybe the sudden, impossible clarity that the family name and land and contracts and threats had finally failed to alter the basic physics of consequence, but Tom's hand faltered. The revolver dropped to the dirt. Sloan and the other agent were on him in seconds, driving him against the metal wall, cuffs ratcheting shut. Tom grunted, then twisted enough to spit blood and words over his shoulder at Daniel. "You think Neil won't survive this?" Daniel looked at him and knew, from the tone more than the content, exactly what the line meant. Neil was gone. Not literally proven, not yet, but gone into legal strategy, into denial, into some expensive room where men advised him to say nothing human again. Tom had just lost the ability to distinguish loyalty from surrender. Daniel said, "That's his choice now." Tom barked a laugh that turned into a cough. Choice. Then the agents moved him outside. In the sudden light after the dim shed, the whole field seemed too bright, too open. Daniel stood in the doorway and let the wind hit his face. His hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, but from the body's delayed recognition that a line had been crossed and survived. Carla came back after securing the scene. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "You all right?" Daniel looked out across the fields toward the highway, where his truck had crashed the night before, toward the town beyond it hidden by distance and trees and habit. "No," he said. "But he's in cuffs." Carla nodded. "That counts." Neil Whitaker was arrested at 4:17 p.m. in a law office parking garage in Salina, after his attorney negotiated the theater of surrender, and the state declined to grant him the privacy he was hoping to buy. Search teams at the fertilizer plant found leaking drums, falsified inventory logs, buried waste, and enough contamination to put federal agencies on notice before sunset. By evening, the local news vans had arrived. By dusk, people in Ashbrook were standing in driveways and church parking lots, and the checkout line at Bender's Grocery, speaking in careful, shocked tones about the Whitakers, about the county, about the boy, about the sheriff, about all the things they had maybe suspected, and definitely tolerated, in softer language for too long. Daniel spent those hours in interviews, chain of custody signatures, preliminary statements, and one mandatory hospital x-ray that confirmed 2 cracked ribs and a concussion exactly as everyone more sensible than him had predicted. He came out of the clinic after dark with an elastic wrap, discharge papers, and a level of exhaustion so complete it no longer felt like tiredness. It felt like aftermath. Maggie was waiting in the parking lot beside her car. She had come without announcing it, which under other circumstances might have irritated him, and now only made him feel suddenly, fiercely grateful. She got out when she saw him and crossed the space between them before he could say anything. How bad? Painful. Not fatal. She looked at the discharge packet in his hand, then at his face. That answer is always worse than the chart. He let out a small breath that might have been a laugh. Probably. She stepped closer and adjusted the collar of his shirt with fingers gentler than the motion required. You going back to the station? He started to say yes, then stopped. The reflex was still there, automatic as breathing, but for once he saw it before it fully left his mouth. He thought of Eli, of Denise, of Tyler's draft email, of Tom in cuffs, of the long, ugly public work still ahead that no single night could finish. And he thought of Maggie standing in a clinic parking lot under buzzing lights, having waded through the worst day their town had seen in years, without once being treated as incidental. No, he said, not tonight. Her eyes searched his face, as if testing whether he understood the weight of what he had just chosen. You sure? He nodded. They know where to find me if the building catches fire. Maggie's mouth softened. Not quite a smile, something more fragile and more real. They drove home in her car with the radio off. Streetlights slid across the windshield in warm intervals. Ashbrook looked changed now, not because buildings moved or roads bent differently, but because the illusion around them had cracked. People would spend months deciding what story to tell about that crack. Some would say they were shocked. Some would say they always knew. Some would resent the exposure more than the crime. That was the nature of these things. Truth did not arrive to applause. It arrived like weather damage, forcing everyone to decide what they were willing to rebuild, honestly. At home, the porch light was on. Daniel moved more slowly up the steps than he used to, and Maggie did not comment on it or rush ahead to help. She simply stayed close enough that help existed without being announced. Inside, the house smelled like tomato soup and toast. A pan sat on the stove. 2 bowls waited on the counter. The sight nearly undid him. Ordinary care, humble and untheatrical, had become overwhelming by the end of this day. Maggie ladled soup while he sat at the kitchen table in the same chair where they had faced each other before dawn. He noticed then that the table no longer felt like a battleground. Just wood. Just home. She placed a bowl in front of him and sat opposite with her own. For a minute they ate in silence. The spoon felt heavy in his hand. The heat of the soup moved through him slowly. At length, Maggie said, Eli called me. Daniel looked up. How was he? Scared. Trying not to sound scared. She dipped her spoon once and set it down again. He said you called him before the news hit. Daniel nodded. I did. Thank you. The words were small. Their effect was not. He looked at her over the steam rising between them. I should have done that a long time ago in a lot of ways. Maggie held his gaze. Yes. No softening. No absolution. Just truth without cruelty. He respected her more for that than he could explain. He set the spoon down carefully. I don't think I knew how to come home from this job, he said. Not really. I think I kept telling myself if I could carry it alone, then none of it touched you. But it all touched you anyway. Maggie listened, with her hands around the bowl, warming them. You carry things like they're proof you're necessary, she said. And then, you resent everyone who notices the weight. Daniel, let that settle. It was so accurate it almost felt merciful. Probably. Definitely. He looked down at the table, then back at her. I don't want to do that anymore. Maggie's expression changed, not because the sentence fixed anything, but because he had said want instead of should. Desire was always more honest than principle in marriages that had been starved by duty. Then don't, she said quietly. He nodded once. Outside, somewhere in town, a siren passed faintly and kept going. The world had not stopped. The case would continue. Hearings, charges, Reporters, depositions, county meetings full of people trying to salvage reputations from the wreckage. Denise's grief would deepen before it changed shape. Eli would still come home carrying months of distance that needed more than one phone call to bridge. None of that was solved. But the man who had chased a boy down County Road 7 was in custody. The lie called hit and run was dead. Tyler Grant's voice had made it out. Later, when the dishes were rinsed and the house had gone quiet again, Daniel stood in Eli's old doorway and looked into the dark room. Nothing dramatic. Just the bed, the posters, the shape of absence familiar and no longer deniable. Maggie came to stand beside him. They did not touch at first. Then her hand found his good side carefully, fingers resting against his back where the ribs didn't scream. He leaned, just slightly, into that contact. "He'll come down this weekend," she said. Daniel nodded. "I know. Don't make him do all the work." Daniel let out a breath. "I know." They went to bed not as people magically restored, but as people too tired to keep pretending restoration would ever be magical. In the dark, after the lamp was off, Maggie lay facing him this time. Daniel could hear her breathing, feel the quiet warmth of her near enough to matter. He reached for her hand under the blanket and she let him take it. The grip was not dramatic either. It was tired, real, and mutual. Somewhere between the pulse in his ribs and the slow settling of the house around them, Daniel understood the hardest truth of the day. Tyler had trusted him to make them answer, and he had. But the rest of his life, the one outside uniforms and affidavits and county maps, would require a different kind of answering, slower and less visible and no less demanding. In the morning, he would begin that too.